Good afternoon, friends and colleagues, fellow citizens, and welcome to the September 18, 2018 board meeting of the Prince George's County Board of Education. Before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone, as always, to please turn off your wireless communication devices or put them on vibrate so that they do not interfere with the taping of the meetings. And I will ask Ms. Quinteros-Grady to please lead us in the board prayer and pledge of allegiance. Please rise.
O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies, being ever mindful of your guidance, steer us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. Amen. Amen. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mrs. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Certainly, sir. Good afternoon, board members.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Ms. Ahmed.
Here.
Ms. Boston. Mr. Burrows. Ms. Eubanks. Ms. Hernandez. Mr. Murray. Ms. Page.
Present.
Ms. Quinteros-Grady.
Present.
Mr. Valentine. Mr. Wallace.
Present.
Mrs. Williams.
Present.
Dr. Wiseman. Dr. Eubanks.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, may I please have a motion to adopt the September 28, 2018 board meeting agenda as amended? So moved. May I have a second? It's been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Thank you. That motion carries. Colleagues, if you would please take a look at the September 6, 2018 board meeting minutes, and I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I will entertain a second to approve. Thank you. So enthusiastic about our motions this afternoon. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the minutes. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Thank you. That motion carries. And, oh, I didn't pay attention to this. We don't have a news break today? That's a first.
Turnaround time between the meetings was a little tight for the team, so
all right,
we look forward to an 8 minute.
Yes, I want an extended news break
at
the next meeting. I'm just saying, I'm sure Dave Zarin is out there working on one right now as we speak. There's no question. All right. So we'll move on then to the report of the chair. You know that we here in Maryland seem to have a relatively quiet weekend, we hope, but our thoughts and our prayers are with our colleagues in the Carolinas, North Carolina in particular, who have been experiencing Hurricane Florence and its tremendous aftermath and the devastation that storm has caused and the lives that have been lost as a result. I know that in the face of tragedy, we always stand united, and let's pray for our neighbors to the south and urge each of you to consider supporting organizations that assist in hurricane recovery. We know if we come together and lend a helping hand in times of trouble and need, it will make all the difference in the world. So again, let's please do keep our friends and family and fellow citizens in mind over these next coming days. In addition, I sadly, but with pride, ask us to remember the loved ones who we've lost in our own community, and I want to mention four particular, and ask us to think about them and our others who we've lost. The four I want to mention are Darafunmi Diaro, a second grade student at C.T. Reed Elementary School; Ms. Jacqueline Pilkerton, a paraprofessional at H. Winship Wheatley Early Childhood Center; Mrs. Shirley Conley, non-public placement specialist in the Department of Special Education, and Anthony Pope Jr., a teacher at Bladensburg Elementary School and brother of internal audit staff member Patrick Pope. Would you please join me in a moment of silence honoring these loved ones? Thank you, my friends. I'm really happy and excited to let you know that this Saturday, the Board of Education and the Department of Family and School Partnerships have joined efforts to combine two very innovative and informative events, the College and Career Readiness Summit and the Family Institute Conference, entitled this year Passport to Success Expo. This event will provide parents and students of Prince George's County Public Schools an opportunity to learn how to navigate the PGCPS system through interactive workshops and exhibits. There will be over 35 universities and colleges represented, and some schools will even provide on-site admissions. In addition, there will be local government agencies, businesses, and trade schools, as well as police, fire, and EMT representatives for students seeking careers after high school. The Passport to Success Expo is a free event and will be held at Oxon Hill High School from 8 a.m. until 2 p.m. Again, that's this Saturday. This year, we will provide breakfast, transportation, childcare, and a host of resources. Please visit our website for more information, and online registration is important as well. So please, if you're in the audience, if you're listening and hearing and watching us on TV or on live stream, please spread the word on social media and tell your friends and family about this incredibly important event. Other upcoming meetings and announcements: October 11th, 2018 at 5 p.m. is a board work session, and October 23rd, 2018 at 7 p.m. is our next regularly scheduled board meeting. Meetings of the board will be held here in the Sasscer building and here in the boardroom. Persons interested in speaking at meetings of the board must register using our online registration tool found on the PGCPS website under the board tab. Just click the Quick Links tab that reads Public Participation in Board Meetings and Hearings. Registrations are taken on a first-come, first-served basis starting 4 days prior to the scheduled meeting, up till 2.5 hours prior to the meeting's scheduled start time. If you don't have access to the internet or want more information, you can register by calling the office at 301-952-6115. This concludes my remarks, and it's a pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Golson for the Interim Chief Executive Officer's reports. Dr. Golson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the third week of school. I know it feels like it's been longer than that, but it is not. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to welcome our new Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Michael Herbertson, who you see right there. Wave. He's joining our team from Alexandria Public Schools and has extensive experience in working with other urban districts, and I believe that he will be a great asset to Prince George's County Public Schools, so welcome. It has been great to do school visits and see our educators doing the same rigorous content across the district with their own flair, of course, which is just one of our many ways where we can monitor implementation of our curriculum. Our staff continues to work diligently to resolve issues with air conditioning, and the number of calls concerning bus routes and late arrivals are continuing to decrease each day, with the increase in the number of issues being resolved. So I want to thank our transportation and building services staff for continuing to work tirelessly to make sure that we provide a service to our staff, students, and parents. I also want to encourage all families to join us as we continue to focus on student achievement this school year. Schools are hosting back-to-school nights this month, which serves as a great opportunity to meet your child's teacher and to find out what you can do at home to help support your child to succeed in school and to enrich their educational experience. This Saturday, we're hosting the Passport to Success Expo, which combines our annual Family Institute Conference and College and Career Readiness Summit. With more than 25 workshops and 35 higher education representatives and exhibitors sharing resources and ideas, this free event has a wealth of information for families and students. This year's inspirational keynote speaker is none other than Wanda Durant, the mother of NBA champion Kevin Durant, whose $10 million Durant Center will open this fall in Seat Pleasant and house the college track program. We've also started planning our proposed 2020 through 2025 capital improvement plan. If you couldn't attend the public hearings last week, you can still share your input on school improvements, renovations, and new construction. Please just email your comments to capital.improvements@pgcps.org. At our last board meeting, we had some amazing Girl Scouts discuss the need to include increasing mental health services and inclusion in our curriculum. And I wanted to make sure that I share with our public that mental health is addressed in elementary health education through instruction with our recently adopted curriculum, The Great Body Shop. Its specific theme is on self-worth, mental and emotional health, which essentially is helping our students learn to appreciate who they are as individuals, learning to respect others, and the appropriate expression of emotions. Through this theme, age-appropriate and relevant content, our students are being taught in kindergarten through the completion of elementary school. In 5th and 6th grades, the issue of depression is raised with potential warning signs and the importance of students communicating their feelings and seeking help with their problems. And at the secondary level, students learn of self-image, decision-making, conflict resolution, mental and emotional disorders, depression, and suicide prevention. Thank you to the Girl Scouts for allowing me the opportunity to highlight the support we provide to our students through the content and the content that our teachers provide. It's important that our students know that we value their voice, that we hear them, and that we want to make sure that they are a continued part of our educational experience. This week, I'm proud to report that there are 3 Prince George's County Public School students from Eleanor Roosevelt High School that are semifinalists for the National Merit Scholarship Award. The National Merit Scholarship Program honors students who show exceptional academic ability and potential for success in rigorous college studies. Those finalists are announced in the spring, but I want to say a special congratulations to Bethany Koo, Tracy Wynn, and Audrey Rappaport. For more student success stories and exciting things happening in our district, please feel free to visit our webpage at www.pgcps.org. You can sign in to receive emergency alerts and or receive our Engage PGCPS newsletter. You can follow us on Twitter, blog, and we also started our new season of PG-13, which highlights our athletic programs. Lastly, yesterday evening, more than 100 families were displaced from their homes due to a fire in New Carrollton. And so we want to extend our prayers to those family members. We've identified the schools where those students are impacted and are working closely with the Department of Social Services to provide support to those families and students so that they won't have interrupted educational experiences. This concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for that great report, Dr. Goldson. We'll now move on to public comments this afternoon. We have 2 people registered to speak on agenda item 8.2 and 2 registered to speak on non-agenda items. I will remind our friends who are speaking today that you're registered to speak in public comment forum where the Board of Education will listen to your comments but will not address your comments. All registered speakers will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. At the sound of the buzzer, please complete your final sentence only. And please do not relinquish any part of your speaking time to another registered or unregistered individual. Adherence to these simple guidelines will help to make the public comment move smoothly. We will start with speakers on agenda item 8.2. The first registered speaker is Tanya Sweet, Oxon Hill High School PTSA President.
Good afternoon. I am Tanya Sweat, President of the PTSA of the Oxon Hill High School Clippers Incorporated. The renovation of Oxon Hill High School was reported as completed in 2013, and due to cost overruns and poor planning, a large portion of the construction was not finished. The renovation of the school was planned for a student population of 1,500 students. However, with the modification, the construction as completed only accommodates 1,200 students. Oxon Hill currently has an enrollment of 1,468 students. Aside from the removal of a wing from the building, other major pieces of the construction were removed or omitted from the project because of financial shortages that arose during the construction. The stadium lights on our football field were not installed, and the softball field has a continuous problem with standing water, and its scoreboard is missing. That problem could be a violation of the Title IX of the Civil Rights Act and must be addressed as soon as possible. Earlier this year, the Department of Capital Improvements notified the school that they intended to install the stadium lights on the football field in June. However, we understand that due to a $300,000 underestimation of the installation costs, the work has not yet started. I respectfully request that the Oxon Hill High School renovation project be reviewed and money budgeted to complete all of the work that was left undone in 2013 as promised. We are aware of other recently renovated schools, that have similar issues. For example, Accokeek Academy underwent a multi-year remodel, but its outdoor classroom is yet unfinished. We suggest the board require that the Department of Capital Improvements review all of the so-called completed construction projects started since 2007 to look for changes or omissions as a direct result of financial shortfalls and determine whether these items can be completed within a reasonable amount of time. As we lament about the unfinished work at Oxon Hill High School, we recognize that other schools require significant improvement. Fort Washington Forest Elementary, Flintstone Elementary, Fort Foote Elementary, and other schools within the system could benefit from modernization. To help with that, we recommend that this board and the PGCPS complete the hard work of redistricting that was started a few years ago. The growth in the county supports balancing our school populations and redrawing district boundaries. We believe this will aid in the process of modernizing our schools for generations to come. On behalf of the PTSA of the Oxon Hill High School Clippers Incorporated and all the students of PGCPS, I thank you for your time and for carefully listening. And I'll also leave a copy of my written comments for your records.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ms. Sweat. My apologies for mispronouncing your name. It's spelled correctly here. I just missed that. Our next speaker is Michael Kravitz, Benjamin Floyd, PTO.
Good afternoon. I'm here again, so I apologize if I sound like a broken record. But I'm here to advocate on behalf of Benjamin Floyd, our students and our teachers, about getting a new auditorium. Again, the analogy that I like to use is that we are like a STEM school without a science lab. We do not have a place for our students to perform their various creative arts, performing arts, in a venue which is commensurate to the emphasis that we put on it. That said, I understand that capital improvements as a genre is a multi-year project, planning. It takes a long time for funds to come through, and I get that. But we are not currently on the radar right now, and I'd like to see that changed. And I know there are about 650 kids who would agree with me. So that said, I'll be here in the future to address this. I'll give you an update. My daughter was doing a petition around the school for the students. She's about a third of the way through the student body now. She said she's having some trouble with the older kids because she's in first grade and they don't want to talk to a first grader right now. But she's actually getting some of their signatures with a little bit of assistance. So she's doing well, and I hope that by next month's board meeting I'll be able to present to you a completed petition from my daughter. And I would also, using my remaining time, I'd just like to extend an invitation to all of you. We have our back to school night Next week, the 26th is for our middle school kids, the 27th for our elementary school kids that start at 6 p.m. in our cafeteria, which is currently what we have to use for some of these type large meetings because we don't have an auditorium. So please come on out. We'd love to see you there. And thanks. I will end early for you guys.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Kravitz. Our next speaker is John Straub of the Adelphi Hills Community Association.
Good afternoon. Members of the board, my name is John Straub, and I represent the Adelphi Hills Community Association. Our community of Adelphi Hills has suffered significant damage due to flooding since the 2003 construction of Mother Jones Elementary School in our neighborhood. Our councilwoman, Danny Taveras, has recommended to this board that you approve the alternative siting of the new Adelphi Middle School onto the campus of the current Adelphi Elementary School on Riggs Road. This action will prevent a significant increase in flooding and related issues in our community. Our organization is in complete support of Councilwoman Taveras' recommendation, and we urge the board to accept these recommendations. Thank you. I'll give you this.
Thank you so much, sir. And our next speaker is Cecilia Gomez Shoal.
There you go again. It's Sela Gomez Shoal. No, Cecilia.
Sela. Once again.
That's okay. I'm going to start calling you Eubanks instead of
called
Eubanks.
Please, I've called
That's the
much.
Spanish pronunciation.
Absolutely.
Okay. The minutes that, wait a minute, you better go back up because number one, they finished early, and
That's
I was
fine.
having
Okay.
a comment with you.
Okay, we're going to
Thank
go.
you.
Let's go back. Okay, you ready?
You've been not so nice with me before. Go ahead.
All right. Ready?
Dr. Eubanks and members of the Board of Education, Dr. Goldson, fellow colleagues and staff in Prince George's County Schools, parents and students. We celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month every year between September 15th and October 15th. This year's theme, One Endless Voice to Enhance Our Traditions. Celebramos el mes de la herencia hispana. Nuestro tema, una voz interminable para mejorar nuestras tradiciones. My name is Sela Gomez Shoal. I am one of the less than 4% Hispanic employees in our county schools and administrative offices. I am the proud teacher of ESOL for newcomers to the United States speaking no English. I'm on my 25th year of teaching for the county and 45th year as a Prince George's County resident. I graduated from Bowie High School in 1975. If you're not a Prince Georgian, you may not appreciate that in 1973, when I first set foot in the United States, that was the year of the federal law mandated busing in our county schools. Prince George's County was then over 90% white. I was part of the 5 Hispanic families that lived in Bowie then, and that included the famous Boludas. I watched the Board of Education meeting earlier this month and couldn't help but smile when I listened to the discussion over Latino and bilingual Spanish staff needed to be more able to communicate with our growing student population. I have been active in expressing my concerns that our school district is not ready for the next student population increase since 1996. When I started teaching in the mid-90s, I had a lot of colleagues who were also Hispanic Latinos. Some left because they saw a glass ceiling. Some left because they were made to translate for everyone in the building and could not do their jobs as they were hired to do. Some left because they were treated badly. Some left because there was no one who could help them navigate the administration building that you're a part of. Not its physical outward structure, mind you, but the inside, the politics, and all the guts. I give you all the background to tell you that I will continue to advocate for the county government and schools to increase its Hispanic and bilingual staff to a more equitable level that reflects the current population, as well as the estimates projected back in 2000 in the U.S. Census, but you chose to ignore. By the time the figures for October dry in ink, we're probably going to be about 35% of the student population. For next year, projected 40. So if this is alarming, you haven't been paying attention. We're getting ready to be counted again in 2020. When those figures are published, we expect to see an exponential increase to the original estimates and projections. Valid and respectable research that our African American community, including, with all due respect, yourself, Dr. Eubanks, in the past to argue that students of color benefit from having roles in the classroom and in positions of leadership that have been made in our school system, spearheaded by programs such as Black Male Achievement in the 80s and the 90s, and countless others, but no such for the Hispanic community. What are we doing to accommodate and welcome our Hispanic families in the county now and the ones to come?
Thank
I
you.
have more, but I will leave it for you to read because it's just as damning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comment this afternoon, and thank you all for coming out to speak in public comment forum. We appreciate your contributions to our dialogue. They're very important. And at that, we will move on to our discussion item for this afternoon. And I will yield the floor to Dr. Golson for an introduction of the discussion item on our park results. Dr. Golson.
Thank you. It gives me pleasure to introduce our Chief Accountability Officer, our Chief of Academics, and our Chief for Special Education Student Services, who will do a presentation on our park 2018 park results. We'll begin with Dr. Strader.
Okay, good afternoon. Chair Eubanks, Vice Chair Boston, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to share the results of the 2017-2018 state ELA and math assessments. So to provide a little bit of background before we get started, the state defines proficiency on the park assessments as achieving a scale score of 750 or greater, which equates to a performance level of 4 or 5, as well as from a definition perspective, they equate it to college readiness or on track for college readiness. That's a very high standard. So I just wanted to tee that up and provide that definition just before diving into the data. So this first slide summarizes Prince George's County's data compared to the state. Prince George's here is reflected in the blue columns, followed by the state in orange. As you can see here, there's 3 sets of columns. The first set of columns is the English Language Arts grades 3 through 8 performance. The center columns are the English Language Arts grade 10 performance, followed by English Language Arts grade 11 performance. The 3 columns here are actually requirements of several pieces of legislation, compliance pieces. The first 2 sets of columns solve dual purposes, to inform our instruction, obviously, as well as to satisfy the requirements of the Every Student Succeeds Act, otherwise known as ESSA. The third set of columns there, all the way to the right, help us satisfy the requirements, the reporting requirements for the Maryland College and Career Ready Act. We're required to assess all of our students by the end of grade 11 for college readiness. So you can see the performance here, the first 2 columns. Again, you can see ELA 3 through 8, Prince George's performance 29.4 compared to the state of 41.6, and that reads out respectively across the next 2 columns. The next slide, we're focusing on the trend information. Still maintaining the 3 sets of columns, English Language Arts, grade 3 through 8 to the left, English 10 in the middle, English 11 to the right. You can see the 3-year trend in our performance in these main subcategories. So you can see in English ELA 3 through 8, first columns, our performance has increased. Actually from 2017 to 2018, the difference between the blue column and the purple column there is roughly 2 percentage points. That actually exceeds a state average of 1 percentage point, so we are showing increases there. Looking all the way over to English 11 on the right side, you can see a considerable gain from 17 and 18 as well, over 5 percentage points there. English 10, I want to spend a little bit more time talking about that. It appears from this chart, you can see that our performance is actually regressing over time. So of all the student test takers that have taken English 10 over the last 3 years, this is their trend. I wish to emphasize the word all because that population has changed as the graduation requirements have changed for our students. Actually, what has happened going from the 2017 to the 2018 school year, because English 10 is now a requirement for graduation, the 2018 population also included retesters. Roughly a third of all test takers were retesters from the prior year. So I want to spend a little bit of time here and break it out. So on this slide here, what you can see, I'm referencing slide 5. On the left side, I've broken out the retesters. So we filtered on only those students taking the assessments for the first time. So you can see from 2017 to 2018, we're actually showing an increase over those years. And actually that increase exceeds that of the state as well. In the center, that's the performance of our retesters. And then to the right were the graphs that I just shared with you on the prior slide. That's all test takers. So looking at that chart there in the center, if you look at the student counts, you can see how they change. In particular, where it says retesters, in 2016 there was 301, 2017 636, in 2018 there were over 4,000. Again, that's because that's the year the graduation requirement kicked in for those students and they had to retest. In other words, they're required to pass in order to graduate. Okay, so this trend's also going to hold true when I share the Algebra 1 data momentarily. So taking a look at the social demographic characteristics, breaking this data out by student groups. You can see here again for English language arts, focusing on grades 3 through 8, the breakout, again, Prince George's is in blue, the state average is in red, and you can see how our students are standing up again to the state average. A few points to highlight. If you look at our Black or African American population, the first two columns there on the left, our performance is actually exceeding the state average, as well as with our white population and our multi-race population, in addition to our socioeconomic group there all the way to the right, the free and reduced price meal population. So this is English language arts, grades 3 through 8. Taking a look at the next slide, which is focusing on English language arts, grade 10. You can see the trend information there. Breakout. Followed by, on slide 8, English language arts, grade 11. Switching content areas. Referencing slide 9 at this point, similar to what we just went through with English language arts, I'm going to take you through the journey on mathematics. This first slide, again broken out into the 3 main columns here, combining grades 3 through 8 performance with Algebra 1 in the middle, followed by Algebra 2 all the way to the right. Again, Math 3 through 8 and Algebra 1 are also our ESA, or Every Student Succeed compliance measures there. And the measure all the way to the right is our Maryland College and Career Ready measure. So you can see our performance, Math 3 through 8, 17.3, State 34.1, and so on as you go through the tests themselves. Taking a closer look at the trend information. Again, you can see on the left, that's Math 3 through 8. The growth here has been rather insignificant. It's been roughly 1/10 of a percentage point increase for each of the 3 years. The state, for your information, is averaging roughly a 1% increase. It's just shy of a 1% increase in math for each of those 3 years. So we're not quite on pace with the state in mathematics, where, as I mentioned in ELA, we seem to be 2 percentage points where the state's averaging 1%. So we're a little above the state when it comes to the trend in English language arts. Algebra 1, similar to English 10, you're seeing that downward trend, but again, we're going to take a look at the retester performance here in just a second. So again, that performance is impacted by the inclusion of retesters. And then you have Algebra 2 all the way to the right, where you're seeing that increase from year to year, roughly 2 points per year. So focusing on the Algebra 1, again, the impact of the retester population, if you were to compare the first-time test takers there on the left side with the overall population, The first-time test takers for 2018 was 17.1%, where if you look at the entire population, it's 11.9%. So you can see there's roughly a 5 percentage point difference when you filter out all the retesters. So it's important to understand, especially when we're looking at our Algebra 1 instructional programs, you want to focus on those first-time test takers, not necessarily within that conversation of the Algebra 1 coursework. You don't want to include the retesters there. It is important to focus on that population of students and how we're best servicing those students, but they're truly two separate conversations. So we need to look at the data two separate ways. And you can see here from the chart there in the top right, our retester population is significant for 2018. It's roughly 5,000 students. So again, you can see the impact that they have on the overall results for Algebra 1. Breakdown by socio-demographic characteristics for math grades 3 through 8. Again, we're breaking this down by the various student groups. See that information here. Followed by Algebra 1. Mathematics, these charts are fairly consistent actually when you look over the trends for each of them across the groups, followed by Algebra 2. Prior to this meeting, we had conversations with the board members. We had opportunities to call and ask questions. One of the questions the board was asking then was, what's the difference between state reporting of performance versus graduation requirements? There's actually two different data sets that we need to reference, two different definitions. Earlier I mentioned we define performance by college readiness. We define it as a performance level of 4 and 5 or a scale score greater than or equal to 750. For the graduation requirements for this year, it's actually defined as approaching college readiness, which is a performance level of 3 in addition to performance levels 4 and 5, and it's a scale score greater than or equal to 725. So the question was, what does Algebra 1 and English 10 look like if we're focusing only on the high school graduation requirements? So the purpose of this slide is to share that information. So when you're looking at English language arts for your first-time test takers, you see here for 2018, 53.5% of our test takers, first-time test takers, are meeting that standard. If I were to go back and show the performance, which is the performance level of 4 and 5, that was at 33%. So when you include performance level 3, you're basically increasing your student population by 20%. So our graduation requirements, and it's going to be similar when we take a look at the Algebra 1, graduation requirements by including performance level 3, it's an increase of roughly 20% of students meeting that standard. So here you can see for English language arts, this is inclusive of performance level 3, 4, and 5. This is our percentages and our trends for the year. Followed by Algebra 1. So that concludes a high-level summary of the data. I'll now turn the presentation over to my colleague, Dr. Kara Libby.
Good afternoon. Kyra Libby, Chief of Academics. Thank you. So the Division of Academics has analyzed the data, and we have or will implement the following strategies to increase student success on the PARCC assessments this school year. Informal observations. The Division of Academics is using an informal observation tool to monitor instruction and the implementation of the approved curriculum, textbook, and resources in the classrooms. We will be utilizing data clinics through collaborative planning to provide guidance to school-based teams on delving deep into their data in order to improve instruction based on each school's student population. Beginning this school year, we will have mandatory mathematics benchmark assessments which are internal assessments for grades kindergarten through 8th grade, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. These internal assessments will be given at the end of quarters 1 and 2. In kindergarten, the benchmark assessment will be given at the end of quarter 2 only. These benchmark assessments are administered only in quarters 1 and 2 so that teachers can assess students' strengths and weaknesses in order to adjust instruction to help students to be successful on PARCC. The benchmark assessments are not being administered in quarters 3 and 4 because the PARCC window opens and students are taking other content area state assessments. So we did not want to overburden students with even more testing during quarters 3 and 4. The content teams for English and mathematics have also provided supports for repeaters by placing sample PARCC-like assessments, items, and other instructional strategies that are in the curriculum for grades 10, 11, and 12. In addition, the content teams are providing opportunities for students to take the sample PARCC-like assessment items on the computer or other devices during the school year leading up to PARCC. So, for example, our mandatory mathematics benchmarks will be online for grades 6 through 8 in high school to give students the opportunity to practice on using a computer or another device. The content teams will continue to offer professional development in order to build teacher capacity around the curriculum and the delivery of instruction. We will also continue to deploy our literacy and numeracy coaches to the schools that have had low performance on PARCC. This is our second year with the numeracy coaches. We have 16 total, 8 for elementary, 8 for secondary. They are supporting 24 elementary schools, 13 middle schools, and 12 high schools. Each coach supports 3 schools each, except for 1 middle school coach has 2 K-8s and 2 middle schools. For our literacy coaches, we have 17 in 17 schools, so 1 per school. We have reassessed how they will work with the school teams based on our PARCC data. The literacy coaches will still provide support on the literacy task for all the content areas, world languages, arts, career and technical education, etc. But we're asking our literacy coaches to focus and provide direct one-on-one classroom support in English, social studies, and science. Social studies and science, we're asking for that one-on-one direct support because of the readings and prompts that students have to respond to on PARCC that are technical in nature, and the students need to be familiar with that content to effectively respond to the questions. We are hoping with the focus on for the literacy coaches directly in the classrooms for English, social studies, and science that we will see student scores increase for PARCC. And then on our next slide, ESOL is also a part of the Division of Academics. The ESOL office will also implement the strategies that I have mentioned thus far, but focusing, of course, on those supports for ESOL students. Also ensuring the supports are in the curriculum for teachers, including those scaffolding strategies, providing professional development, and the ESOL office has 2 mentors and 6 coaches from the central office that support 24 elementary schools. These are the instructional supports that the Division of Academics has put in place to help students be successful on PARCC for this school year. I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Mason.
Good afternoon. My name is Gwendolyn Mason, Chief for the Division of Special Education and Student Services. The Department of Student Services recognizes that the analysis of the data indicates that our students with disabilities are functioning significantly below their peers within the state of Maryland. And subsequently, our focus will be in two particular areas: curriculum and instruction, and of course, professional learning. In the area of curriculum and instruction, we believe that it's going to be critical for us to develop very explicit plans of support to ensure that schools are utilizing evidence-based strategies to support the instruction of students with disabilities. We plan on participating in instructional walks and making certain that our teachers are involved in collaborative planning that results also in monitoring the performance of our students as we assist them in helping to achieve the outcomes of the PARCC assessment results, reaching a level of proficiency. One area that we focused on and will continue to work on is the role of our speech and language pathologists, because our assessments are very language laden, and language is one of the barriers that precludes students with disabilities from demonstrating proficiency on assessments. Our speech and language pathologists have focused on the acquisition of the content of academic language, and they are also expected to be a part of the collaborative planning that goes on in schools to support both special ed and general education teachers in supporting our students to enable them to access the curriculum. We will continue to strive towards the goal of inclusion, because inclusion provides our students with the opportunity to get access to experts in the content areas so critical to reach the outcomes desired on the PARCC assessment results. But professional learning also plays a critical role, and we will be joined by our colleagues in curriculum and instruction to assist us in providing professional learning opportunities in the area of co-teaching at both the middle and high school levels. We're also going to be providing additional technical support and assistance by coaching our teachers through the utilization of these particular evidence-based strategies in the areas of reading, language arts, and mathematics. We believe that with extensive professional development and professional learning opportunities, the coaching that we will be able to provide, it will enable us to implement and deliver an especially designed instructional model that will enable our students with disabilities to improve their outcomes, while at the same time providing positive behavior support and training to address the needs of all of our learners. So these are the efforts that the Department of Special Education will make in collaboration with curriculum and instruction. Dr. Golson?
Even though there were increases in the number of students that earned a 4 or higher in English language arts for students in grades 3 through 8 and English 11, we acknowledge that there is still lots of work that needs to be done in both English language arts and mathematics to meet the state average. There are a few schools that made notable increases that I want to highlight to continue to and we will continue to discuss the work that we must do across the school system. Berwyn Heights Elementary School, 5th grade students had an increase of 21.2% of students who scored a 4 or 5 on the English language arts exam. Capitol Heights Elementary School students in the 3rd grade for mathematics had an increase of 35.3% for students who scored a 4 or 5. William Wirt Middle School, students in grades 6 through 8 had an increase in reading English language arts with 15% and 7% respectively. Crossland High School had a 14% increase on the English language arts exam for our 11th grade students. And Parkdale High School had a 7% increase on the 10th grade English language arts exam. Last year, we added numeracy coaches and external mathematics coaching support to targeted schools to assist teachers with pedagogy and understanding mathematical reasoning. 21 of those 37 schools with targeted numeracy support saw small gains in their data. Over the last 3 years, we added literacy coaches to targeted schools to assist teachers with pedagogy and understanding ways to embed literacy strategies in all content areas. 13 of those 19 schools with targeted literacy support saw small gains in their data. You have heard from the lens of academics ESOL, and special education on what we must do to improve academic achievement for all students. It's also important to note we started our leveled principal meetings around analyzing park data. Our principals looked at systemic performance data across the content areas and reviewed specific research-based instructional practices for implementation in each of our schools. In addition, the implementation of our new school performance plan program will provide an opportunity for all schools to analyze their respective data at the teacher and student level with the focus on identified changes for instruction and monitoring that are needed to move our students forward. Every principal meeting will have a focus on data with discussions around next steps and how those next steps will be monitored by both the principal and central office staff. I close by saying I'm a firm believer that what gets monitored gets done. We are committed to making sure that our students experience a world-class education from phenomenal educators that will be evidenced in our standardized assessments. We're now open for questions and discussion.
Thank you, colleagues, and I'm sure folks have plenty to add. Not coincidentally, Mr. Wallace is first up for discussion, but before I get him started, he has a special delivery from his wife that we would like to present to him today, because it is Mr. Wallace's birthday, and his wife brought him. All right. Yeah, leave it on the table so we can have some. No. So, happy birthday, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you very much.
Not only is it his birthday, clearly he's a newlywed, because guys married a whole lot of years, their wives don't. This ain't how we roll. So, so congratulations on both fronts.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, and I'll give you a couple extra minutes if you want to give a birthday speech of any kind.
No. I'm just thankful for another year and to spend it with my colleagues here instead of. Thank you, Randy.
Now I'm going to dance.
I took inventory of the fruit. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, administration, for the presentation. I guess my first question, I buzzed in kind of 30 seconds before kind of got into the data, because I was reminded by an article that I read a couple weeks ago that the state of Maryland is no longer doing park. Is that correct? Or is that the governor or the state legislature said they're no longer administering park?
Okay. Yes, it is the state's plan to transition from the park assessments. They have issued their RFPs, and the plan is to move to a computer adaptive test moving forward. Okay. This will be the sunsetting year for the park assessments. With that said, however, what's been different when we've changed our assessment programs in the past, the standards are actually remaining the same. So what our teachers teach and how they teach should remain unchanged at this point. So it should have no impact to them. What will change is going to be the test delivery itself, but it should still have the same type of items. It should contain the constructed response items, the technologically enhanced items. So the test look and feel should be similar. It's just how the items are being presented to students that will change.
I just want to add that this will be the last year for park. Next year will be a pilot year, and then the year after that will be full implementation of the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program. It'll be now acronymed MCAP, because that's what we do. We make acronyms. But it's also important to note that as a district, though, we thought it was important to make sure that our students at the secondary level still had an assessment that they valued that we could use in the meantime. And so, once again, by the request of principals and many of our students, we'll be offering a SAT day in the spring, where our students will be able to take the SAT in the spring during the school day. And that will replace English 11 and Algebra 2, which is the data that you see on the screen here, knowing that that will be phased out. We still wanted to provide a support for our students.
Okay. And so in that pilot year, not this year, but the next school year, will that be a graduate, it wouldn't be no longer be a graduation requirement, right? It's a
Yeah,
pilot.
well, good question. Those are the same things we continue to ask. In a great world, it would not, because those pilot items would have to be used to determine the baseline score. But we're building this plane as we're flying it. So we will keep you updated as the state informs us. But in an ideal world, it would not, which means we would have a year next year where we would not necessarily have any student achievement data to report, which is not congruent with the components of Every Student Succeeds Act, which means that something we'll have to give, not sure what that is, but when we find it out, we'll let you know.
Thank you. Thank you both. My next question, I go back to slide 6, and I think I made this claim a couple of times. Could the data be broken up per capita on students? I see it's broken up by race, language proficiency, your poverty status, and if you have a learning special education status. And if we're weighing us against the state. But, you know, if 62% of our population is Black or African American, and another county has 8%, couldn't we per capita have more high-performing African American students than the state? Or conversely, if our special education population is 11.5%, but another school district may be 15, 18%. How do we kind of scale that data? So not only do we see these charts based off of the percentage county to state, but also making sure that we're looking at how many students exactly this big school system has. I would love to be compared to like-minded school districts or like-sized school districts throughout the nation, more so than, you know, my brothers and sisters on the Eastern Shore who combined may equal us.
Yeah, so we can provide the data however you'd like to see it. I have another presentation that we could queue up that actually has 62 slides now. That has all kinds of different slices and ways of looking at it. So please share with us how you would like to see it, and we can produce whatever your wishes.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to add to that, but that's duly noted, because if you look at our data on slide 6, we outpace the state for our African American students. And so by looking at the percentage of students that we actually provide educational expenses for in comparison to the other districts, it will be a great way to analyze that. It'll show that how we do carries the state. The
state, absolutely. And I always made the claim that this school district has, and I'm maybe wrong, but I always going to say until someone corrects me, the highest number of high-performing African-American students, regardless of gender, throughout the entire state of Maryland. And I think that's something that we need to profess proudly. There are a lot of areas to improve, which goes to my next question. On slide 17. Slide 17. I think it was, maybe I missed it in the presentation. Was this the image of all students? That explained and why ESOL students and special education students are not in with all students? Maybe I missed that explanation. Why are those two categories separate from, if we're focusing on all students?
So the majority of the presentation focuses on all students,
Okay.
but as always, we try to focus on those two areas where our data supports that we do need to make sure we pay attention to our subgroups. And special education and ESOL were two of those subgroups that we felt like we could not go without making a comment on how we're addressing it as a school system.
Okay. Would that be the same for, excuse me, for the free and reduced meals? I guess now it's free meals.
Yeah, actually it would be, but the state is going to be doing a new designation for free and reduced meals students, so there'll be two separate categories now, free and reduced meals and economically disadvantaged students. We have some students who will fall in both categories. So really, this will be the last year that we'll be able to use even the forms designation piece.
Okay.
And just like ESOL and special education and farms, it's important to note that really these students are counted twice. So they're counted in their grade level category. Some cases, they're counted 2 or 3 times because I could be a 3rd grader who receives special education services who's also a student who's on free and reduced meals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My second to last question, I guess, is for the entire administration. How are we making the curriculum relatable? And I asked that question to one of my colleagues at my daytime job, a recent graduate of the school system. And he was, a wizard in math. He should have my job. But he said a lot of his classmates just kind of zoned out in 10th grade because we kind of start seeing where you lie in society. I'm not going to be a mathematician. I'm not going to be an engineer. Why should I need to focus on algebra? Or why should I even try to accelerate to AP calculus? I just want to be a blank, blank, blank. And I don't see how this relates to my field and my growth to get to blank, blank, blank. So how are we making the curriculum that is how we as a system are graded in terms of this data relatable so that students don't zone out?
So we always incorporate real world situations, and several years ago we changed the curriculum so the students had to really own the information and show how they got to the response, how they got to the answer. And it was not so much of what's the correct response, although we still want that, but how do they get to that response? And for some, it's working together in groups and pairs. So we're making it more so it's like, this is what you're going to do in your real world, work world. Sometimes you have to work together as a team to come to a solution. So we've embedded more of those type of like problems into the curriculum.
And I just wanted to add as well, having the opportunity to go across the district and seeing our teachers deliver the prescribed curriculum, I had the opportunity to see many versions of what Jack can do through our literacy book, which is part of our early childhood grade 1 through 3 program. And what's important to note is that even though we provide the prescribed curriculum, each teacher brings to that experience their own flair, meaning that they know their students, they know what they're interested in, and we do provide our teachers the autonomy to do that. So I don't ever want us to think that every single teacher has to follow it from the letter, from beginning to end. But it's part of getting to know who your students are and what they're interested in so that you can make sure that you tailor that prescribed curriculum to their interest.
And have there ever been student focus groups? And I always caution when I say student focus groups because sometimes I ask to meet with students and it's always the leaders of the school, the ones on the, like me, SGA, blah, 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 blah. Instead of focus groups of students like me, when I was in high school, I wanted students that were like my brother, 1.8 GPA. I want students that suspended once or twice. How do I capture those students and what their interests are to make sure that the academics presented before them are relatable and that they ultimately are interested in coming to school, staying in class, and being attentive?
You bring up a very good point, Mr. Wallace, and that's one of the areas that we're giving a lot of focus to this school year moving forward. We have the numerical representation of our data, but what we've shared with our principals and our teachers alike is that just as we're looking at those percentages, it is incumbent upon us to look at who those data represent. So just as we have students that are meeting the mark, for those that are not, who are they? And individually, what are their collective needs? Collectively and individually, what are their student needs? So it's improving our practices as well as we are delivering instruction, but better yet, as Dr. Golson just described, having those relationships with our students that overall improves practice.
That's awesome. This is all just refreshing, and I'm glad to hear all the work that's been done. In my last 40 seconds, Dr. Golson, you brought up a good point about the numeracy and the literacy coaches. In the follow-up for this board meeting, if I could see the schools where those staff members are at and those gains ever since they have been there. I know there's been some kind of vigorous debate on this board on the expansion or reduction or better use of those funds and what those positions actually do and who they actually touch and how those funds could improve student performance, not assistance to staff more so.
We actually have that already disaggregated, and that's my fault that I didn't announce that. That information will be shared in the Academic Achievement Subcommittee. So you'll have that information, the number of years the coach has been there, has there been a change in the leadership of that building? If the coach has changed, how long that person has been there, what their data looks like.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I yield back. Thank you, April, for the fruit.
Thank you. Thank you. We have Boston, Page, Valentine, Ahmed, Williams, Eubanks, and Wiseman on the docket, and we'll start with Ms. Boston.
So, good afternoon. This is very interesting data that we have here, and I think we've been asking for this for a while, so I really, really love this data that you presented to us here today. There are a couple of questions that Mr. Wallace hit on, one of them about the literacy and numeracy coaches. And I know, like, maybe for the last 3 or 4 years, we have added to the budget to increase those coaches. And if I heard you correctly, Dr. Gosen, you said that there's those schools that have had those coaches, we've seen little gain. I guess we can say little gain is better than no gain. But I think for the amount of literacy coaches, and we've been asking this for years, to see that data and whether those coaches are actually worth us actually budgeting to put more money in that area. So, we would like to know what is your take after looking at all of this and analyzing all this data and the trends that you're seeing. Is this something that, as a board, when it comes to budget time, we need to look at a little more? I don't know. I'm asking.
So clearly from our numeracy data, it's clear that we have to have an intervention for mathematics, and it needs to be quick. And it can't just be those areas that are low performing, because in my opinion, all 209 sites are bleeding a slow death when it comes to mathematics, content, and reasoning. And so we have to systemically look at how we support our teachers in mathematics through pedagogy and content understanding and the delivery of the prescribed curriculum. I say that to also say, though, I have analyzed the literacy and numeracy coach data, and I think what we didn't take into account that we have to sit as a team and talk about is the change in leadership that impacted at many of those schools, the data over time, and the change in the coach in some cases, where coaches were moved from one school to another and not allowing consistency at that location, which also hampered student achievement. So the gains that I shared with you was from one year to the next. But we do have data for the past 3 years for our literacy coaches and one for numeracy. Our data, though, also says that we waited to make decisions when it came to mathematics when we should not have. We made the sacrifice to go for literacy coaches. And of course, you can see in our data, we have gains in English language arts at grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. So I say that to say we're not going to get it overnight. That's 3 years worth of data where you're able to see a gain. So I'll tell you that there's value in literacy coaches, but we have to do that same kind of focus now for numeracy. But we've got to do it at a different scale. We won't be able to provide every school a numeracy coach. And so we have to figure out administration, how best we can support our teachers to ensure we get the increases we need in mathematics.
Great. I want to go to slide 20, I think in the special education piece from Dr. Mason. I mean, to see the trends for special education being so low, trailing behind the state, because there's definitely a big difference between the state and our special education students. And I don't know, we've struggled with this over the years, but it seemed like the last trends that we had were much lower than what we've seen for the last couple of years. So I don't know, what I know we've had a shortage of special ed teachers lately. Because that's one of those fields that is hard to, one of those specialty fields of teachers that is hard to fill. And I know a lot of, when I go around the county, and a lot of parents that call me around special ed, they talk about how their students had a long-term sub, and how we train in those long-term subs. That means they're in those classes, those special ed classes all year. Is this kind of accounting for some of that low, those low numbers, that low trend in special education? And if so, what are we as a system going to do, or what should we be doing to try to increase either the professional development for those long-term subs, and how to reach out to different, maybe universities or colleges around here that are certifying those special ed teachers, and how do we increase that?
Thank you, Mrs. Boston, again for that question. Let me begin by saying that when I came to the district in 2015, at that time there was a strategic plan that said that there had been a persistent underperformance of students with disabilities in our district. And that underperformance, from my professional experience, is a direct correlation to where those students have historically been served. When you serve students to a greater extent or degree in self-contained classes with special education teachers who may not be experts in the content subject areas linked directly to the assessments that are being measured, you end up not yielding the kind of results. And when you compare us to neighboring jurisdictions that historically have had a greater percentage of their students being served in a general education environment, you also see improved outcomes for those students. And so I've looked at that data over time, and I've studied it in a variety of different counties, and there's a direct correlation. But then there's also the next step. Once you include students with disabilities, there has to be explicit professional learning opportunities for both the general education teachers and the special education teachers, who then have not only the art of learning how to co-teach, that's just the method of teaching, but it's really then drilling down to the pedagogy and the content. So the emphasis on pulling together co-teaching teams, for example, in the area of mathematics, to teach them how to utilize evidence-based strategies when teaching special education students math content is critical. Discourse is a critical component of helping special ed students understand the content in both mathematics and in English. So that's why we are focusing on not solely our desire to train our special ed teachers and our content teachers, but also our speech and language pathologists around the language, because that's the barrier. Both content areas are very language laden, in addition obviously to the complexity, of course, of the PARCC assessment, which is a very rigorous assessment, assessing children who naturally have deficits due to neurological factors that makes accessing the curriculum more difficult for them. So you have the factor of increasing children in the general education environment. You have the factor of providing professional learning opportunities that focuses not solely just on co-teaching, but on content and pedagogy to give those teachers the strategies to support our students in utilizing, all of our critical experts in those areas. And then finally, as I try to provide my final response to your question, it's imperative that we provide ongoing coaching and we provide the right interventions in our schools. Trinell Bowman and I have taken a look at some of the interventions. Some of the interventions are not explicit interventions that really should require direct instruction. Our students need explicit interventions. So we're going back and we're going to take a look at all of the reading interventions that we need to have in place that are correct. There aren't really evidence-based math interventions, but they're practices that can be utilized, and discourse is a critical component of that. So those are like three critical areas that we have to really focus on as a district to improve our outcomes. And I know that neighboring jurisdictions with better outcomes have utilized those particular strategies to improve their results. But quite honestly, if you really look at the state, no one's really proud of the state data either around special education. So it's a struggle for all of our neighboring jurisdictions, but there are jurisdictions that are performing better.
One last question. I know when we first talked about parks years ago, when it first came about, we talked about how accommodations, the special needs students' accommodations could be used when these students are taking those tests. So, I mean, I don't know, did we ever figure that out? Or a lot of our students have to be, you know, they had to have scribes to read, to write or read for them on some of those subject areas. Were we able to, did the state make allowance for those accommodations at some point?
Actually, Trinell Bowman, you know, before she returned back to Prince George's County, served as the special education liaison on the development of the park assessments, the very accommodations manual that is used in all of the districts that implement parks, she developed. So the truth of the matter is that she has ensured that there are the appropriate accommodations embedded into the park, you know, the park assessment process. What's critical to me, though, is that when I walk into a classroom, I want to see evidence that not only is my special ed or general education teacher ensuring the provision of those accommodations, but that my special ed students are so trained, they know what accommodations they need. They know how to ask for and advocate for themselves. And when I've observed over the course of many years schools that have done well on high-stake assessments, I've seen evidence where special education students know they need to request certain accommodations, but there's also evidence that teachers are providing them consistently. And that's something that, as we go throughout our schools this year and do our instructional walks, we want to see evidence of that.
Yeah, great. I know that'd be easy for kids to, you know, to advocate for themselves in those higher grade levels. And now we're talking about high school, but when we're talking about elementary and middle schools, it's a little harder to have a student to advocate for himself, especially when it comes to those accommodations.
I have seen elementary school students know how to advocate, but they have to be taught. And so, again, if we teach our students early on about what it is that they need, I've seen it happen at the elementary level, middle, and high. And I've seen it happen with children who come from, whether it's a farms profile or economically disadvantaged profile, if they understand their disability and the accommodations they need, but we have a responsibility to teach them those things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Page.
I would first like to thank everyone for their thorough presentation. So my first question is going to be directed on slide 10. Slide 10. Okay, so on slide 10, you mentioned that our Algebra 1 data should be analyzed in 2 different ways. So I wanted to get a little bit more detail on the different way that you want us to look at the data so we have a better understanding of it.
So it depends on your purpose and your lens. If you're looking at the classroom instruction in Algebra 1, then you want to focus on those students that actually completed the assessment right after the instructional program. So that's where I was indicating 2 different ways of looking at the data here. Your first-time test takers versus all of your test takers. So if I'm a teacher and wish to reflect on the instructional program, again, I want to focus on the kids that were in my classroom, the first-time test takers. But if I'm obviously interested in getting all my students through the graduation requirements, I also have to look at what are the intervention programs and what other assistance do I have for those other students that are in those retesting categories.
So I appreciate the presentation on what we will implement this year in regards to improving our students' performance in Algebra 1, and I'm going to be focusing on math mostly. But I wanted to know, what were your takeaways from what we did wrong last year so that we can begin to improve upon what we did wrong in regards to the retake test takers? Because I would assume that if you're retaking the test, you would be getting or receiving interventions to help you pass the test the next time. Since they've already seen the test, they've been accustomed to the test. So I'm assuming that interventions would have been put in place so that students will be able to perform better the second time around.
Yes, so some of those repeaters or the retest takers did not get the support that they needed. So they didn't get the remediation, they didn't get like they may have already passed Algebra 1, but they didn't pass the course. So if they're in another mathematics course, then they didn't get what they needed in that second or third course. So we're making sure that they're getting those embedded strategies within all the curriculums. So no matter what math course they're in this school year, they can get the support through that mathematics teacher.
All right, and the last thing I want to touch on is piggybacking off of Board Member Wallace in respect with speaking with students and their necessary needs. So it's safe for us to assume what students need in regards to curriculum and instruction and direction, but if we don't actually have conversations with the students, especially those who are not performing well on our exams, then it's not safe for us to accurately assume their needs. So I wanted to know if there is a plan in place this year or the next year for advocating or going to students to get their feedback on what they will want to see changed or what would better help them.
Ms. Page, thank you very much for that comment. Absolutely, positively, the expectation is that we have better developed relationships with our students. There has to be the opportunity for our teachers to speak individually to our students, to provide feedback to them specific to their performance in the classrooms. And we, as area offices and central office individuals, are going to be looking for evidence that will actually speak to that. In the middle school level alone, we've begun to talk about the adolescent learner period and the characteristics associated too. So just as we have those adolescent characteristics, knowing how they think, how they learn, we as educators and leaders have to ensure that those practices are occurring in the classrooms. That work began last year. We were provided support and we worked in collaboration with our colleagues from Curriculum and Instruction. We're going to continue with that. And the key word that I've often asked and will continue to ask is, what is the evidence that will actually support what it is you're saying that we're doing with our students? So your point is well taken.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Valentine.
Thank you. I have two questions. One, I'm curious. So my wife and I were reviewing. My son's a fifth grader, so he took an assessment last year. We got the assessments back, but I believe it might have been an AccuPlacer or another exam, and so we as a family are looking at what we can do to better support him. So the question is, how are we using data in between the PARCC exam times to speak to how to improve student achievement? That's the first question. The second question, I got a photograph. You all did a presentation to teachers, and you highlighted 5 schools that did pretty well on the PARCC, and I think you might have mentioned some. 100% of grade 8 females at John Hanson Montessori were levels 4 or 5 in PARCC ELA. William Wirt Middle School grade 6, 14.2% increased in levels 4 and 5 on PARCC ELA. Gwynn Park Middle, 6 to 8 total school percentage of 4 and 5 is 14%. 65% of Accokeek Academy 7th graders were on level. And then at William Hall Academy, 13.6% increase to levels 4 and 5. And so my question is, what are they doing there that we can replicate in other schools? Is there something specific to the demographic there that, maybe we need to be honest about? Are they coming into the school better prepared for kindergarten? What is happening at those 5 schools that we can say can be replicated across the system and can't because of just structural or systematic or demographic issues that we have to address? So one, again, what can we do as a system? What can parents be doing with the data they receive in between the PARCC? But also, what are we looking at those 5 schools that are saying, okay, if we're seeing tremendous gains at those schools, one of those schools is my child's school. The percentage of students there who are on free and reduced lunch is not significant, but it's not small either. And so we are still dealing with students who are, really across the system. but something is happening at these 5 schools. Is it the staff? Is it, is it parent involvement? What is happening there that we can replicate?
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Just last week and on yesterday as well, with our high school and our middle school last week, we celebrated some of the same schools and some of the same performance data that you're making reference to today. Ultimately, what we're saying is that the data, each student's data, should ultimately inform instructional practice. That's the key. When we talked to our principals just last week and this week alike, we shared that information with them. So, back to your question with respect to the conversations that should be occurring with parents, I would ask too that parents, when you're going and you're meeting with your child's teacher, ask them to tell you specifically, how is my child performing? Ultimately though, what we want our students to know as well is what their data is. We want students to be responsible for knowing what their data is as well, and that those ongoing conversations are occurring between the teacher and the student. So ongoing, and in each day in the classroom, the data, each child's performance data, should be informing instructional practice. And the best way to look at that and to gather that information is doing what was referenced previously, and that is at structured time called collaborative planning. It is during those collaborative planning times that teachers are coming together collectively and talking about instructional practices. So that would be one way by which we should, in fact, approach the teacher and student reference to data. Now, you asked a couple of other questions, too. Would you tell me one of the other ones that you asked?
What parents should be doing in between the time. So, again, my son's a 5th grader, and so even though we won't be taking part in 8th grade, from the time you're a 4th grader until the time you're a 7th grader, what information should I be using to ensure that my child is taking that exam in 8th grade, that he or she, my daughter, is prepared? But then also I think, what are the schools that you all highlighting? What are they doing? Are the staff staying longer? Not necessarily longer in a day, but is the longevity of the staff there? Are school leadership staying longer at these schools? Is the personal development? What is happening at these schools that we can replicate across our system?
I do not have with me the actual retention rate of those staff members with respect to each of those schools. But with regard to your reference to demographics should have nothing at all to do with instructional delivery for all students. So just as we've referenced those schools previously, within those schools there are instructional practices that are occurring. During our principals meetings, we also give principals an opportunity, and we will be doing more of it, to have principals to share some of their instructional strategies that are occurring and the way by which. We also have actually gone on learning walks in previous years, and we'll do a better job of doing more of those this year, where we're going into those classrooms and looking at some of those teachers that are doing exceptionally well and mirroring those practices at other sites as well. So we are definitely cognizant of the where is going right, and we are prioritizing more opportunities to go into those classrooms and going into those schools to mirror those instructional practices.
What I'll say, it should not impact it, but it can and it will. If a child is coming into these 5 schools and their kindergarten readiness scores, or the number of words they know is twice as much as a student at another school, then that should impact where we put resources and how we target teachers who are higher performing and ensuring that they are meeting the needs of our most vulnerable students. Because it's not necessarily an idea of let's equally distribute all of our teachers because it shouldn't matter what the demographics are. Well, we need to be more equitable and say, hey, there are areas where it's clear that there's a concentration of students who are coming in who needs supports, and we can predict to a level of certainty that if nothing happens to mitigate that, then we will predict this data. Now, as you mentioned before, that we are making sure that we're putting resources in those places that need it the most. At the same time, we're seeing schools like this that are seeing double-digit, increases. 15, 20%. That is significant. What is happening there? Is parental engagement different? What is happening? You can answer this now, but I would, this is something that I think someone on your team should look at. What is happening at these schools? If it's not income, if it's not race, because in many cases, I think if you look at this, it's not going to be income, it's not race, it's something happening there that we need to look at.
So I just want to make a point that when I highlighted those schools in the beginning or during my reflection piece at the conclusion, it's important to note that we too acknowledge that we need to get to those schools to delve into what's working. I acknowledge them because it's important that our educators know that there's someone who's close to them in a nearby school that they can reach out to get that support, that it's not impossible to have the kind of gains that we've seen at these locations. And so we are going to delve deeper into looking to see what's working in those places. It's key because we have a community in some cases who believe that at William Wirt Middle School, as an example, that there's nothing happening in the building other than a lack of instruction, when clearly our standardized assessment data shows that that's not accurate.
And Mr. Valentine, I was not suggesting at all that demographics does not play a key role. But what I was trying to ensure is that regardless of where a student attends or where they reside, it should not keep us from looking ultimately as what that student's data is or their progress or the lack thereof, and inform the decisions and the instructional practices within each classroom that are tailored to meet the needs of those students.
And I'll just make one last point. You mentioned that parents should be reaching out to teachers to find out what their grades are, their students' performances. I think teachers need to reach out to students as well and their parents and schedule times to go over their child exam scores, whether it be PARCC or any of these intermediate assessments like AccuPlacer or PSAT or others, because in the end, it's the teacher's responsibility as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ahmed.
Good afternoon, y'all. Yeah, I have to.
Yeah, that's good. This might, if this is a regular meeting, I ask everybody to stand and stretch for a minute.
I was thinking that too, Dr. Eubanks.
Yeah, let's do it. Everybody stand up and stretch. Come on.
Can we please?
Midway. Come on. This ain't nowhere everybody probably doing. Yeah, there you go.
We're good.
Do the whole
All right, so.
Thank you. Great suggestion, Ms. Ahmed.
No. Okay, so Dr. Strader, I want to thank you for presenting the data of where we are, and Dr. Mason and Dr. Libby, I want to thank you for presenting where we're going and where we're focusing. My questions revolve around how did we get to where we're at? Because I think that's one piece that wasn't directly addressed in this presentation, and that's something that I'm really curious about. So my first question is, how has administrative leave over the past couple of years affected this data? Do we have data on that?
So I appreciate the question. We don't necessarily have data to compare over the last 3 years, but looking at just a comparison from last year to this year, we had fewer teachers who were on administrative leave for the 2017-18 school year than we had in the previous year. And during one of the early board meetings, I want to say it was during the PARCC presentation that we did last year in 2017, one of the board members asked that we work with employee labor relations to get a list on a regular basis of who those teachers are that are not in the school so that we can provide that academic support in the absence of that classroom teacher. And so we did take that recommendation and did just that. We got a confidential list. That information was then shared with the Executive Director for Curriculum and Instruction. Director for Curriculum and Instruction. She then actually reached out to those schools with the specific grade level to provide that academic support, so that we could make sure that our students were able to have educational experiences in the absence of their regular classroom teacher.
Yes, I think it might be worthwhile to look at how teacher turnover has affected some of the scores of those specific individuals in those classes. And then, like you said, focus on how that transition can be smooth to bridge the gap that may occur if there is a gap that occurs. Like, is turnover a causal factor in some of this? Or is it not? Is that just our assumption? I don't know.
I think it's warranted that we do need to delve a little deeper. It's just as important as when we tell our children to come to school every day, that any day that they miss from that direct instruction will impact them. It's the same conversely as well.
Okay, I think in moving forward, it would be really good for us to track that data. The other thing is how does class size affect this data? How does class size affect learning as it relates, like in terms of the data that's presented here. So I don't know. Is it that the students that are in larger class sizes with no paraprofessional help to the teacher, I'm talking 35 kids in a class, are they performing at equal level to students or classrooms that have 20 students in a class with one teacher? And maybe looking at that analysis of how can we arrange staffing to support if it proves that we need support in larger classrooms to help learning for students.
So I'll reach back out to Dr. Strader after this meeting, because that actually would be work of our research and evaluation team to do a deeper dive into whether class size affect the park data and actually pulling teacher data to make that determination. So we do have a team of people who can do that. We just have to see what other research evaluation reports are on their stack of items that must be completed so we can prioritize this.
Okay, thank you. Those were my two things of seeing class size and administrative leave. Colleagues, do you have any other thoughts of other areas or other factors that might play into the data here that I didn't mention?
I'll ask if they do
It can go into my
They can
time.
bring it up when it's their turn. Yeah, let's go.
Okay, you can use my time for it.
Well, let's not do it that way, but it's a real good question, and so everyone's going to be speaking again. So that's a good question. We'll have them, when it's their turn, to chime in with other ideas, because I have one myself.
Okay. All right, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. First of all, I think we're doing a tremendous job, and we're beginning to see the gains throughout the system. I think it's amazing that some of our schools are achieving, double-digit gains in certain areas, and I think that should be commended. And as you began to say, I always look at it from a student's perspective to see that a student can achieve $600,000 in scholarship money sitting next to someone who may not have achieved so much or maybe following in their path. They could say, oh, I can achieve that. That is a goal, and we have to always put our goal out front versus just dwelling in our issues. We work hard to change our issues, so I want to congratulate and thank all of the hard work that our staff is doing to show these double-digit gains in our school throughout our system. I think we definitely need to share the presentation that you all put together, because it shows that we're succeeding. And I say that because if there are 24 counties in the state of Maryland, we are the second largest. When we have those double-digit gains, the target of the state moves as well. So if we're the second largest and we have double-digit gains, the target of trying to meet the state, it moves, is not as far away because we're making bigger strides. So I think it's very important for us to remember that we're chasing our tail. That's just what we do. But then I always look at the data because, I really enjoy this. Looking at last year's park report that was presented to us, it's a little bit difficult to compare apples to apples. I always like to see that we're speaking the same language each time, because if we don't speak the same language, some people can interpret it differently than it actually is. So I would like for us to look at that and be able to compare year to year. For example, our park scores, I think last year shows 3 to 8 or 3 to 5 versus this year it shows the opposite. We should be able to see the same data. But I know, because I always dive a little bit deeper, that we are being very successful. So when we look at this, and I think Board Member Wallace started to touch on it from a different standpoint when he's talking about the per capita, comparing our students per capita. That way we're comparing apples to apples. But I think we really should look at the change per year to year, because it will begin to show that we're making strides in our scores. We're always comparing ourselves at a point in time compared to the state. If we say this year, 2017 or 2018, where are we now compared to the state in 2018? That's a point in time. But if we look at the change from 17 to 18, we'll see that our stride is much bigger than the state has made. And that sort of makes up how we're achieving more, and we're moving the state's point in time further away, but not as far away, if you follow what I'm saying. So I think it's important that we look at how we're changing over compared to last year to this year. And then if we compare that same change to the state, I think you'll begin to see that our delta is much greater than the state's delta. And it shows up in some of our demographic scores. So I think we should look at that and compare the change over time versus a point in time. So as a follow-up, what I'd like to see is that change over time from last year to this year, looking at those milestone tests such as 3 to 5 or 3 to 8, whatever we're looking at, and so on, and the demographics, the demographic change. If we can look at that data, I think it will tell a different story and begin to show exactly what Board Member Wallace was saying, that Prince George's County is the best place to educate our Black and brown children. Because we do have a lot of success. Our kids are leaving the school system and going into amazing schools, amazing careers, and so on. So I think it's important. And I'm glad to see that at Crossland, my school where I graduated, they're showing some strides. I think that is so important. I'm proud of my Cavalier students there, so even though they're out of my district, but that's okay. So number 2, I wanted to understand the difference that we show in numbers on slide 10 and 11. If you could pull up slide 10 and 11, we're talking about those test retakers. And so I just want to look at that, if you can explain the difference there. So on slide 10, it says the total number of test takers, the total number of test takers for Algebra 1 is 15,600 something. And if you go to slide 11, it's 15,451. I just wanted to know what was the difference there. Should those be the same, or why is it different?
So within the data here, we're looking at all students. This is the inclusion for your first-time test taker. I'm just going back and forth. Oh, let me get here. Yeah, so for your Algebra 1 here, 3 through 8, this subgroup, what we had to do to be able to filter out on the population of testers, retesters, and whatever, we had to be able to identify valid demographic information for the students, including their Prince George's ID, as well as their linking. It's called with the state assigned student IDs. So when we moved to this piece to do this type of analysis, we had to remove all of those erroneous scores that we couldn't identify who those kids were. So that's why this number is slightly smaller than you can see this number, 15,628 versus right there 15,451. So there was a small number of students that we couldn't actually attribute a score to. So again, this is all test takers for Algebra 1, so we just grab all scores. And then this, actually, we had to identify the students and the populations themselves, so it is a slightly smaller number. Does that help?
I don't think that it would have made a difference, but if the two would correlate, I think it would be, so that no one will say that we're fudging our scores in any kind of way. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm up just a couple of kind of quick follow-ups to what some of my other colleagues said, and even this idea that Ms. Ahmed brought up about other kinds of things we could be looking at. I'm curious, I was really going to ask about coaching and the coaching impact, and you answered that well. But the other thing I noticed when you looked at interventions, it's really about curriculum and coaching, so kind of all about instruction, which of course I know the core of instruction. But I wonder what strategies you really start thinking about that have to do with kind of other kinds of direct student engagement strategies. In other words, some of our students need more and better time focused on some of these learning strategies, right? Whether it's, other ways that we're going to figure out how to get the home engaged in doing instructional work, what we're figuring out about what's going on in the summer with summer learning loss, after school, and getting more rigorous academic programs and after school programs. So I'm wondering what your strategies are, particularly around the fact that, particularly once these kids are behind, even with really good instruction, they need more time to be able to catch up. What's your, and maybe that's probably for you. I don't know who it's for, whoever wants.
So my team and I have discussed having like a summer bridge for some students who need that additional support, because you're correct, Dr. Eubanks, they don't have it during the school day because they have to take all their other courses. So how do they fit this in? And especially if some of our high school students, they're working or they're in sports or they're in other extracurricular activities. So we have discussed maybe summer bridge, or last year we did an instructional packet that we gave to the teachers, and we asked the teachers to work with the students at some point during lunch or however they could fit it in, so those students could get that extra practice before taking the park once again. But that's something we do need to work on.
Yes, thank you for that, absolutely. And it's kind of, my thought was credit recovery before you need credit recovery, right? So that kinds of extra, that supplemental work that students need, I think, is going to be really important, even if we're giving them great instruction, because I think we really need that. The other question, and this is somewhat, Dr. Libby, you really talked about delving deep into student data, and this is part of the data. There's a lot of other data. So I know my understanding is we don't use DataWise anymore, which was the system of data. So if we're not using that, what kind of ways are we really going to be focusing on not only how we use data, how we increase the data literacy and competence of our teachers and administrators to understand what the data is telling them, and help them to really use the data appropriately to shift instruction and help to focus on the students who need it the most, and all the rest of the great things that we use good data for.
So let me answer that in perfect segue for me to say, DataWise was a process for analyzing data, and we're still going to utilize that same process, but not using just one piece of data. We are creating school performance plans for not only those schools that will be identified for needing additional support through ESOL, Every Student Succeeds Act, but for every last one of our schools. And so they'll all have a data template that they will be able to then look at their data, use the DataWise process in a faster way, because that was one of the concerns of our staff, is that the process was kind of long and tedious, but to use the components of the process so that they can identify areas for improvement. And what that will look like, we've talked about. I just met with Doug's team and his data gurus, and looking at what that data tool will look like for every school. So they'll be able to delve deeper into their student achievement data. They'll have something called School Stat, which provides them an opportunity to look at the data from teacher and student level, but that also has other components in it that are required from ESSA. And so we'll be able to do that still.
Wonderful, thank you for that. That's all the questions I have for now. I'll move on to Dr. Wiseman.
Well, one of the things about being the last on the list is that some of the questions you had.
Oh, you're not the last on the list.
Oh, okay.
So sorry, no such luck.
Well, I did have a question about the repeaters, and I think Dr. Libby addressed that briefly. I was wanting to be sure they had some sort of a support system, because to send them back into that testing environment without some support system just doesn't make sense. But I think you addressed that, Dr. Libby. So I have just two really fast questions then about, from slide 20, really just clarification. The first has to do with how will you target the schools where you're going to provide evidence-based strategies to support the students?
So that is again in reference to special education, and Trinell and her team really has to drill down to the individual schools and look at the data by school, by student, and look at certain targeted groups. So for example, I've always had this interest in looking at those students who performed like at level 3 on the PARCC assessments, because that's a group that you can push and move forward to level 4. So that's how they will do that. They'll analyze the data.
Okay, thank you. My second really fast question has to do with the use of speech-language pathologists. I was just curious how that integrates with regular instruction. I know speech pathologists are very specifically trained, and what you're asking them to do is to help build the vocabulary terms used in assessment. So I'm just curious kind of how you're thinking about that.
So speech and language pathologists for many years have been providing services in classrooms. And the relevancy of those set of services, however, when they're trying to help students who have an identified speech-language disability, needs to be linked to the kind of language that students are being exposed to each and every day as a part of instruction. So when speech pathologists understand what's being asked of a special ed student who has a speech-language disability in mathematics, they begin to understand the language, not necessarily being the expert in math, but understanding the language that's associated with math, and subsequently by collaborating with those content teachers, they can help to improve their outcomes. You're welcome.
Thank you. Ms. Quinteros-Grady, and then Mr. Burrows.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this presentation and being able to have this conversation. I just had a couple, so with the park phasing out, and once again, here we go, 4 years later, change, and trying to stay focused on the kids, on the students. Will there be does this sort of, with the shift to, also as ESSA is there with that framework, an opportunity to continue to look at reducing testing, or and I say that because oftentimes the feedback I've received is that it just doing the different testing takes away from the instruction and so forth. So I just wanted to get your insight about that.
So regardless of the assessment that we get, MCAP, PARC, et cetera, there is a More Learning, Less Testing Act that puts a stipulation on how much testing can take place at each grade level, each school year. And we analyze that with the Department of Testing, Research, and Evaluation and publish that information each year so that our staff knows how much testing, standardized assessment time is being used that takes away from instructional time. That does not include teacher-created assessments. And so that is added on top of, and that's not included in those factors. And we're more than happy to share the chart for this school year.
Okay, because I think at one point it was like 24 hours for middle school. I can't remember. I mean, if we can, if someone could resend that. Okay, thank you.
We'll resend it.
Yes, and then I actually was, because we've also invested on the arts integration, is there any, what is your belief, or do you think, is there any correlation to some of those schools that are maybe have had improvement in doing it, or it's too early to really tell?
We'd have to go back and analyze the data. There's 61 schools total that have arts integration, so we'd need to go back and look to see if over time, it went from 30 to 61, if over time we've seen a change in data. So we'll pull that information as well.
And I think I was heading in the same direction, Dr. Eubanks, around just other interventions. And part of it, I think the academics, of course, are critical, but I know that often there's just a lot of different challenges that some of our students are facing, and the social emotional piece is also very important to address. And so I also think that after school programs or summer, or whether it's the Saturday academies, offer unique opportunities to congregate students in that way and create opportunities academic and socially so that they have those proper supports. And so I know that over the years we've done some investment in those summer, very intentional, but I also think it's sort of just been like little bits and pieces. And so wondering if we can continue to look at that, or what are your thoughts about, because I know that comes out like the little manual that we have, but I haven't quite figured out how the decision is made to where to have it, because the feedback I've gotten from parents is often that they can't access, or it's half a day. But I think we could really make some strides, and I'm sure there's costs associated with it. So, but I think if the board if we're able to discuss this within the budget or have conversations and seeing if these interventions will really produce good fruit around the students, then these are some things that we can should be discussing along with the budget for summer.
Duly noted. It's actually, I have a one-on-one meeting with every chief every 2 weeks, and it's on the one-on-one for Dr. Libby and I to discuss this elementary summer school, what that looks like and how much that could potentially cost. And I received that just from input from parents.
Great. I think the last comment I will make is around, I think Dr. Eubank touched on this again, around parents. It was one, probably a workshop that I held in partnership with a nonprofit where 80 parents came. And this was when the park was sort of being introduced and people were dropping their heads around what was that. And these were Latino parents that don't always feel comfortable or confident around, okay, do I know this? But they were researching how to help their kids, and they're like, I don't quite know it, but I actually researched it on Google. And what that said to me, there's definitely a desire for our parents to want to support their children in their academics, and just, I guess, want to continue to put that out there. What can we do to continue to give, whether it's tips for parents that are very, focused, that they can sort of do, like, hey, first quarter, this will really help if you do ABC with your child, and second, just steps that repeating, doing, not necessarily teaching to a test, but more so like strategies that they can support their children and that they can actually take home and practice at home. That's it for me.
Thank you. Mr. Burrows.
Can you go to slide 18? I guess I'm just trying to figure out what's happening different today than last school year based on this slide.
We're doing the data clinics that we did not do last school year, the deep dive into the data. And over the summer, the content teams updated their curriculum documents. And for middle school reading English language arts, they actually have a new textbook and resources. So all of that was updated and all that's new. And some of the other content areas have new textbooks and resources as well. So what the content teams did over the summer, they really revised and changed their curriculum documents to make sure they're meeting the needs of what the students need to learn in the classrooms. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that I mentioned with the data, with the literacy coaches, they were assisting all of the content areas, including the arts, career and technical education. So actually my team and I, we had this discussion a month or so ago, and we said, what do the literacy coaches really need to do? They need to focus. So what are they going to focus? How are the literacy coaches going to help to move the needle? And if they focus on English, social studies, and science, instead of being spread out, yeah, we still want them to support all the teachers, but we want them to do that one in the classroom, try to help that direct one-on-one instruction to support the teachers, to support the students.
I just want to add, because I wasn't sure if Dr. Libby was going to bring it up, the numeracy benchmark for mathematics is new. And that's a piece based on the response from our curriculum and instruction team last year that our teachers and our principals were asking was a tool that would inform them of how well our students were doing. So the announcement that she mentioned about from kindergarten to grade 8, et cetera, first and second quarter, and there not being an assessment, third quarter, et cetera, that's new for this year. In addition, though the literacy and numeracy snapshot is not new, we've placed a strong emphasis with the support of the Chief of School Support and School Leadership and the Associate Superintendents, that literacy and numeracy snapshot helps to monitor and ensure that our teachers are doing what they're supposed to do in the classroom each and every day. And with that monitoring lens and focus, that has also changed for this school year.
Can you describe that a little bit more?
So we figured, can you click on the link there?
And we can bring up Ms. Holmes, who's our coordinating supervisor for literacy.
Oh, you can't. Nope, he has to log in. Okay, so we'll just have Victoria go ahead and share.
Inside, you can, by the way, any of us as board members who click on that link on our computer, you'll be able to see it when you click on that link inside the presentation. At least it worked for me.
Perfect, thank you.
Well, one of the things that we worked to do over the summer was revise the literacy numeracy snapshot so that administrators can monitor instruction using this one document. So initially, it only had or referenced the literacy task and the initiative for numeracy. And so what we did, we worked with science and social studies and reading language arts to begin to look at that document and add in those action items and those quarterly expectations that will help an administrator to be able to monitor their program. So when we think about, as you see the topics there, assessment, curriculum, and instruction, this document will help an administrator to go in and know what's going on from month to quarter in their building and be able to have those strategic discussions with the stakeholders that will help to monitor that program. So pulling in their TCs and DCs and their assistant principals over the respective content areas to help really drive the discussion and then to be able to monitor what's happening in the classroom.
So what is the current plan to increase our literacy and numeracy scores? Like, I mean, is there a plan that I can go to outside of these bullet points to see, where we currently are, but what exactly is happening to boost the school district and individual schools? Like, where would I see that?
Well, we do have the literacy plan, the initial literacy plan that we started with some time ago. But I think as a team now that we've kind of shifting our focus, that we will go back and revisit that plan to say, what are the current practices that we are utilizing now to inform what we are, the support that we're providing for our schools currently.
So we continue that literacy plan. In addition, the team created a numeracy plan. So you can use both of those documents to help at least get an idea of where we're driving to. It's very similar to a school improvement plan where it's a living document where we do make changes on a regular basis after we've had instructional practices or looked at data to help inform our practice. So we'll definitely provide both of those. I'm looking at Dr. Libby, she can provide those. And I was remiss in noting that the change in the organizational structure also, we believe, will help to lend itself to a conversation that will help to improve student achievement. So at the elementary, middle, and high school level, all of those principles being clustered together, we just started that conversation but had the opportunity to do just that. Our very first meeting with our principals was solely on park data at that instructional level. We haven't had elementary yet, but we've done it at high school and middle school.
Yep. That makes sense. I guess one of the concerns that I have is that it seems like, every year we kind of go up a few points, go down a few points in certain areas. And every year the administration, not this administration, but several previous administrations over my last 10 years here tells the board, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And if we do X, Y, and Z, we'll get here. And it's just never the case. And so I'm really trying to, but then I look at some of the charter schools in DC with the exact same demographics as ours. And I look at their data and they're getting it done. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out what exactly needs to happen for us to get it done. I mean, and I know we keep changing the tests every so often, and I know we keep changing other things, but it's like at some point, we're talking about students, so it's just, I'm not unclear as to what needs to happen in order to put us where we need to be.
I think part of it is you've already acknowledged that we have an assessment that keeps changing. And when we are comparing students, really, we aren't doing that trend analysis to see where the third graders are from the previous year to where they are now as fourth graders. So what you're looking at are different sets of students each year. And in the Academic Achievement Subcommittee, they do delve into looking at our student achievement data and following cohorts of students. So I strongly encourage us to kind of look at it from that lens. It's also important to know that PARC is just one of many assessment tools that we use to monitor and look at our student achievement. And so a child may not receive a 3 on the PARC assessment here, but then it counts for College and Career Ready Act as meeting the requirement for graduation. Or they may get a 3 on PARC and get a 4 or 5 on the advanced placement exam, or a higher score on SAT. So I want us to be clear that when we look at it, we should be looking at multiple factors, not just one. And ultimately, yes, there are lots of factors, and I agree. I've been here just as long as you have. And what's important to note that there are also human factors that exist regardless. There are leadership changes that happen not only at the executive level, but at the school-based level. We have teachers who come and go, as well as students. At the end of the day, I think what our team is trying to convey is that we try to take those factors into place, and we want to make sure that no matter what that experience is, our students receive the best instruction possible from the amazing teachers that we have. So we will continue to work to do that. At the same time, it's difficult to compare apples with oranges because some of those charter schools don't use the same assessment that we use to monitor student achievement.
Well, I was talking about PARC specifically. One of the things that I appreciated was really, I guess, in Doug Anthony's shop, the professional development piece. I went to one of the professional development sessions this summer. It was the math department, and they were analyzing data, and I think it was an elective, so teachers who wanted to go could go. And they were looking at their PARC data, and they were looking at the data of individuals in their school. I guess all the super teachers went. They were very proud of their data. I saw their data, but as I was looking at their data, I saw data of other people in their building, and I asked, well, like, what happened here? What happened here? And I'm seeing great things in pretty much everyone who was in that room, but right next to their data, there's an issue. And when I asked them about, why is that the case, they were very honest. Like, they know who the ineffective teachers are in their building. And they expected the data for certain people to be very, very poor. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, like, if they know it, I'm sure principals know it and assistant principals know it. I mean, how do we fix that?
That's the value of collaborative planning. So we have implemented collaborative planning for I don't know how many years, but it has to be done on a regular basis, and it does have to be monitored. And so I might be doing an amazing job as a mathematics teacher on a unit on an area, but the teacher next to me might not have. And so we have that opportunity during collaborative planning to share best practices and talk about ways to improve so that we both can share those same kind of successes. Collaborative planning, we've shared with all of our principals and our content leaders why it's important to do it on a regular basis so we can support each other. What's also key is that we do it more at the school level on a unit and analysis basis, not necessarily just on an assessment. So they're able to make those changes instructionally ongoing. The implementation of the mathematics numeracy benchmark will help to do that as well. So just think that for a while we didn't have that. We didn't have an assessment that teachers could use on a quarterly basis to help to inform instruction, but now we do.
Yep, that should be a huge help. We talk a lot about the instructional, the literacy coaches, the numeracy coaches, the whole nine. I guess one thing that I'm unclear on is in several buildings the role of like a vice principal, right? I mean, shouldn't they have the skill set to do some of this work?
So if I am an assistant principal and I actually was a former world language teacher, then I might not have the skills to go in to teach or to assist a teacher with pre-calculus or calculus. But as an assistant principal, I do have the expertise and knowledge about good pedagogy and what instructional practices should be utilized to make sure that our students remain engaged and are able to receive that content. Our assistant principals and principals are there to monitor the delivery of content and instruction. It is our expectation that they go in and that they do classroom observations, that they sit down with teachers to talk about beforehand what to expect during that lesson, during the lesson to see that, and then at the conclusion to have reporting, feedback, and next steps on how that teacher can improve if necessary. But no, I don't expect that the assistant principal will go in and be able to teach the lesson that the content teacher has been trained to deliver.
Is that what a coach does currently?
So our coach actually doesn't go in and take that lesson either. What our coach does is help to provide a support to our teachers so that they can assist them in delivering that content and pedagogy. Very similar to a co-teaching model, where our co-teachers help our regular education teacher. And in some cases, I've been in sites thus far where you can't even tell who the regular teacher or the co-teacher is, because they're able to actually divide that class up, provide instructional practices in a variety of different ways so students can receive that content.
Mm-hmm. I guess, what's the process of like recruiting and incentivizing like highly effective and skilled teachers from across the region, even in the county, to areas of the most need?
Well, that's what the new grant we have is going to help to support and provide for our teachers. So if you recall, we received a $25 million grant, and that grant is to help us to recruit and retain teachers so that we can help to build our teaching workforce. So that grant will help us to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For round two, we have Ms. Williams.
Just a continuation. We discussed the number of coaches, both literacy and numeracy, and it went a little fast. Can you go over those numbers again for literacy and numeracy coaches? And then I guess we'll get the list of where they are as a follow-up.
Yes, we'll send you the list. So there's 16 numeracy coaches, 8 elementary, 8 secondary, and they are supporting 24 elementary schools, 13 middle schools, and 12 high schools. And for literacy, we have 17 coaches, and the coach is at the schools, so 17 schools.
17 schools, okay. And so we also talked about that you were looking at how the work was delivered, and there were some changes that were made. What is your expected goal with these changes? I mean, are you expecting to see increases this year when they take the PARC test this year, so that we could see those outcomes when we review the scores next year?
Yes, I am.
Do you have a prediction?
Oh, no,
I'm a bet, and I'll take a bet.
I'm not going to do that, but yes, I am. Because, again, when we focus, over the years, we've noticed when we focus and we do a concentrated effort, and then we're all focusing on the same goal, and Dr. Coley and I are talking, Dr. Mason and I are talking, we're all on the same team, and we're all going to that same goal together.
Right.
So, yes, I think there's going to be an increase.
And I think there will be, because we're doing something different, so I expect something different. So when you provide the list of those schools that are that have those literacy and numeracy coaches, I would love to see what the baseline is this year. If you could pull those scores from this year and attach those to that list, then we will be able to see next year the change. And if there isn't a change, then we know that there is something else. If you exceed your expectations, then we're doing it right, and then we can, translate that into other schools. I would like to see where we move to see how we, what we need to do next year. So the next topic is, there was a discussion, and I think it was one of the questions about an opportunity for the parents to review their child's data? That is always a question that comes up, and my response is that the parent needs to make that initiative. Is there an opportunity for parents to sit down with their teacher, guidance counselor, or school administrator to go over that? Is that opportunity available, and if so, when does that happen?
Ms. Williams, each year there's an opportunity through, each school is supposed to provide an opportunity for teachers to meet with parents during a parent conference.
Okay.
So that is one way. It does not mean that that is the only instance, but there can be several others as well. But a parent-teacher conference is a requirement at every school level.
So this is separate from the parent-teacher conference day that we set aside for?
It can be ongoing. That happens to be a day that's been on the calendar now for years. But it does not mean that that is the only day that a parent can inquire with a teacher with respect to their child's performance.
Okay. So I think that's good to know that if I think one of my colleagues mentioned about helping parents with instruction. And I don't mean instruction in the classroom, but, with parent instructions, because my kid didn't come with any instructions. But if the school said, here is a list of things that you should, when you schedule a parent-teacher conference, these are some of the things you should ask. And the strategy may be, closer to the end of the year, you schedule that parent-teacher conference, because the Parks test comes at the end of the year. Or at the beginning of the year, if they're still in that same school, they can go over those Park scores. I think if we gave our parents some instruction on what they should do when they have when we have that parent-teacher conference day, or what they should ask when they're having parent-teacher conferences, this could be one of those things, so to add on the list.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Valentine.
Just a quick follow-up to my colleague, Ms. Williams, about the use of Parent University. We have our summit coming this Saturday. It would have been a good opportunity to talk about this with a very open audience of parents who have this instruction, but in the future, as we're rolling out the Parent University, to have a module on, again, best practices led by parents. I'll be honest, my children also do Kumon twice a week, and so we are supplementing our child's education in ways to support our children. To hear from other parents talk about what they're doing at home. It may not be Kumon, it could be just the books you're reading. Our partnership with the public library is invaluable. I mean, you could literally save money on a $300 Rosetta Stone language instruction for free right now. But do parents know that? Do they know about the vocabulary? Do they know that some of the things that the children has an iPad in their hand all the time? Playing Fortnite is okay, but there are other ways that you can use that technology as well. And with all the FaceTime children have, are they using it constructively? And so I think to the points you heard earlier, to really ensure that we have that parental engagement, because I believe data shows nationally there is a strong correlation between that. And sometimes it's not income. I mean, sometimes folks with higher income are not as engaged as those who aren't, but it's how the time is being used constructively, and having parents talk to other parents about what they're doing. So I just asked that, how we look at the Parent University as a model to share best practices in parental engagement as it relates to taking information, sitting down with the information, how you sit down with how you engage with your teacher, how we engage with our children's teacher. On the first day of school, we reach out to them and say, can we have your phone number to text message you? They can say no. But it's an opportunity for us to engage with them in a different way, to talk about our children's instruction. These are things that we can be doing that aren't heavily resource-driven or have to do a lot of money. It's just us supporting one another. And so I always say we don't need anybody outside of Prince George's County to help us. If those who are doing well can help those who are trying to do better, then we'll be just fine.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, administration, for this very valuable information. We look forward to some regular updates about how we're progressing, especially around some of these strategies I think you heard a lot about. coaching and a lot more about how to develop new strategies. I was going to move on, but do you have a round two, Mr. Burrows? Mr. Burrows.
What can the board expect via the budget process to help with this?
Okay. Did you pay
this area?
So actually, I'm going to try to tackle budget a little differently this time. And so for each division, they will present their budget to me. So I've already blocked out 10 days to meet with each division to review line by line their budget request to make sure that we are effectively spending our funds. Right now, our priority, though, as a system, our priority will be about student safety first. We're in the process of responding to the Maryland Safe School Act and have received funding to help support that endeavor, but it's still not enough. And so we are completing the analysis now. Actually, we'll be reviewing that data this afternoon. The state will be providing us $1 million for safe schools. But so far, from just a preliminary analysis, we need about $6 million to do what we need to do across all 209 schools. And so we will have to look at what that looks like financially for us. Then we'll go back and look at our data to help to inform our next set of areas of where we'll focus. My hope is that when I meet with each of those divisions and to go line by line, we'll be able to find areas of saving so that those savings can be redirected to areas of importance. And my ask won't be as great, so that once again we can go back and focus on what I've said when I first got here, which was the restoration and compensation piece. So in an effort to try to still move the system forward, but find ways that we can contribute funds back to employee compensation.
I think a part of that conversation that you have as we have the employee compensation piece, it has to be some sort of give and take around the quality assurance. We cannot continue to have our students sitting in class with people that we know are failing them, people that the whole building knows that they're failing them. Other students know that they're being failed in certain instances. And so I think that will be a big part of how we move forward as a system, is retaining our very best people, keeping them here, paying them more, obviously, but also we have to be able to exit out ineffective people a lot more easier than we do now.
And I appreciate the support from the board when we do present those employees to you for termination.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to be for it. But as far as along the lines of the literacy coaches and the numeracy coaches, that's not going to be a focus. Like, what will be the items that this board needs to start investigating now? Because I don't want to start investigating things and then it's too late. But what are the things that we need to look into now? The justification for.
I have to say, it's really too early for us to say that these will be our focus areas. I can tell you student safety is a priority across the state. And what we are committed to doing is ensuring that our students and staff members are safe. And so that is why I brought up the Safe Schools Act and needing to make sure that we provide in our own budget the gap that will exist. But it's way too early for us. The analysis of the data from coaches was helpful, but I still have to have a conversation with our team. And we actually have scheduled a retreat in October so that we can have designated time, 2 days to a day and a half, so we can actually focus on what that priority will be for the next school year.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Page.
So I'll be quick, but I wanted to know if there was something in place or if there's been consideration around personalized professional development, piggybacking off of Board Member Valentine and Board Member Burrows in regards to individually evaluating teachers and placing them with a partner where a teacher in another school or a teacher in their school is succeeding in that area, or they may be lacking in another area that another teacher is succeeding in, partnering them together so that they can progress in that aspect.
That is excellent, and that is our mentor teacher program.
Okay.
That is what we do. We provide that support now through our mentor teacher program. The number of mentor teachers we have, of course, each year we do put in our budget to try to increase as a way to support our teachers. And we have found success in providing that support so that our teachers are taken off of the list of what someone may deem as ineffective into being effective.
And so for the mentor teacher program, is that only for new teachers or teachers that score poorly on their evaluations, or is it across the board all teachers are in this program?
So we do a combination of both. It's for struggling teachers, and then we also provide a support for new teachers as well.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully you guys will consider into the next year making it for all teachers, because even those teachers are tenured, that doesn't necessarily mean that those teachers are exceeding expectations in which I hope we would expect from our teachers when educating our students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now I don't see any more lights, so we will move on from this discussion item. Thank you again. We look forward to hearing from you about progress, and we will move on to the consent agenda. And I will yield the floor to Dr. Golson for an introduction of items 5.1 through 5.7 under the consent agenda.
Yes, items 5.1 through 5.4 requires board approval of proclamations commemorating Red Ribbon Week, National Bullying Prevention Month, and International Conflict Resolution Day. Items 5.5 through 5.7 requires board approval of education specifications for the new International High School, Glen Ridge Area Middle School, and William Wirt Middle School.
Thank you, colleagues. I see some lights on. I'm going to entertain a motion to accept and then go to the lights. It's been moved and seconded to accept. I'll start with Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Received a comment from a parent in District 7. I'm pretty sure it's too late now. I don't think we have a board meeting until after this date, but Men Make a Difference Day is in early October. And I think the parents said that back in the day there used to be a proclamation commemorating that and making sure schools knew about that and have some programming around that. Could there possibly be from the administration some communication sent out to the schools about Men Make a Difference Day?
Yeah, so actually Dr. Golson is the creator of Men Make a Difference Day, Dr. Michael Robinson. Dr. Golson's doing an interview with him in a couple weeks. And we'll do a formal announcement for Men Make a Difference Day. Each year we participated, but we will make it a significant piece. I think it's scheduled for Veterans, Columbus Day, October 9th or somewhere around that time. So we'll send something out.
Ms. Ahmed.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarification around the ed specs. You said that there's no cost associated with each of those ed specs. So can you please explain that? What does that mean?
So I know you don't see Dr. Watts. He's on the back row, but he is available to respond. We shifted seats today for the part presentation.
The education specifications.
I'll go ahead and
that's
speak
item
for
5.
him. So what happens with the education specs is that we get an approved template that we use, and then for each of those individual schools, a committee is established that looks at the ed specs and looks at the needs and programs in that school to help make changes to support that school environment. So in terms of financial, it did not cost us additional funds to do those education specifications. I'm sure it cost people money and time to be away from their regular jobs because it does require some external input from parents. We had parents, students, people in specialty areas to look at those sites to make recommendations on what that future plan would look like.
And staff members in the school as well?
Yes, definitely. Principal as well.
Okay.
And let me just note, typically when we do staff, at least at some of the secondary sites, we typically ask for one person from each content area. Most of the time it is the content leader for that area, and if the content leader can't do it, they select someone from their team.
Okay, and so the education specifications that are being presented to us today have been vetted through a number of representatives from different areas, and this is an approval to move forward to the architect, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so this could change.
Yes.
Okay.
The architect would have to go look at the site to see if the recommendations that those group or committee members made will actually fit on that site, and whether they can meet the needs of the requests of those committee members.
Okay, so the education specifications have no budget implications, but feasibility studies do, but this sounds a lot like what a feasibility study would do. Maybe Ms. Chason, I just saw Ms. Chason walk in. Maybe she can provide some insight. I'm sorry for calling you out, if this may not be the way.
So you want me to speak to feasibility studies?
Yeah, just the difference between the process for getting an ed spec here versus the process of a feasibility study.
Okay, so it is a long process. A long time ago, the board approved in 2015 prototypical elementary, middle, and high school specifications, educational specifications. And we use those as the basis to do each school that comes up. And so William Wirt, Glen Ridge, and International High School are all based on those board-approved ed specs. But they're individualized for each of the schools. And as Dr. Golson said, we go through a project planning committee, and then we get input again so that they're refreshed, they're up to date. And so this is the most up-to-date educational specification for each of these schools that the architect is working with.
Okay, and the reason that we have feasibility studies is exploring a brand new facility. I'm trying to figure out, why do we have a feasibility study?
So a feasibility study is actually a requirement of the state. It's also best practice that if you want to evaluate what's the best use of your money, is it to tear down the school and replace it, or is it to reuse some of the school, which is more sustainable, right, and renovate it? But we have to look at the costs of each, and the architects and engineers help us do that, and they base it on the ed spec that they're looking at. And so if we have a really out-of-date high school with old rooms and a small media center, or an elementary school that doesn't have a gymnasium, you'll see that the ed spec is very misaligned in the new ed spec with the existing school, and often that will end up being a replacement school.
Okay, so an ed spec is done when you know exactly kind of what you need to do with the school. A feasibility study is exploring the different options that could occur.
Right, and often the ed spec is included in both, but it's refreshed each time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Will we see a Woodmore Elementary School education specification coming to us?
When it's in the CIP, then we would refresh the ed spec again, especially if it's been a few years, and make sure that it's up to date for the architect.
Okay. Colleagues, I was part of the Woodmore feasibility study process, and so I was enlightened to a lot of this stuff, but this is why I'm asking these questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mr. Valentine. Ms. Williams. Yes. No, as Mr. Valentine said, passed. I'm sorry.
Thank you. A lot of our, I'm referencing items 505 to 507. A lot of our comments and today from Oxon Hill were related to changes in the building from the design to actual completion. On our school board page, and I love this page, I can't wait till it's populated, we have this future project site page. I love that. I'll be on it every day. I think it's important that we focus on sharing the budget and our schedule. If there are going to be changes with that, you all bring that to us. But I think it's also to dive into some of those changes that affect the number of students that are going to be in that building. The earlier we can get that out and make it transparent that that's what we're doing because of either a budget or a time constraint or whatever it is, I think it's important that we get that out, or we have a discussion. So when we're tracking the progress of these new schools, if we can add that, if there are changes to sizes of the building or community wants or desires that get pulled out, it would be great to have those to make sure that's a part of that progress of these buildings as they move along, because we all know that after we spend a lot of time designing the building and coming up with all these wonderful wants and desires, budget impacts that. And it's important that the community follows that and it appears to be transparent so that when we get to cutting that ribbon and they see that there isn't a rooftop garden, they fully understand why it's not there. So I appreciate how we're becoming more transparent with our work, and it's because of the staff that we have here today. What happened before is what happened before, but the staff that we have today, it's very clear that you're with the engagement of the community, so I appreciate that. And also, this is this follows our EFMP plan. And it's important that we recognize that we're not pulling this out of the air. It's following a study that we did years ago that sort of directed our work with our limited $160 million that we get a year for construction projects, that we're following a plan to attack our aging schools and our overcrowded schools. So where we are with this Glen Ridge New International High School and the William Wirt, it's because our educational facilities master plan did that. So my question is, when is it most effective for communities to give input to that EFMP plan? Because right now we're doing the CIP work, but when is the most effective time for them to bring up something that they would like to have added to the EFMP or capital maintenance program or whatever? What is the best time for that during the year?
I'd have to go back and backward map. When we presented the Education Facilities Master Plan, I do know that it was approved by the board on June 7th of 2018. And so to backward map it, it would probably be better to engage the community about what's in that plan in March so that they have ample time to review it, to come out and make comments. Because once it's been approved, it's extremely hard to go back and undo a decision that's been made. But we do listen to community input, and so having backward mapped that, it's probably better that we do a better job of being transparent with our community members that it's going for board approval on a specified date and to backward map it so that they have an opportunity to comment.
I do also want to mention that we just had a conversation with the CIP staff about better community engagement overall. So part of this is education. So,
Yeah.
you know, Dr. Golson says we're a district of acronyms. And, you know, until you actually sit down and understand what the EFMP is or what the Master Plan Support Project was from several years ago or what CIP is or what the Comprehensive Maintenance Plan is, it all sounds like alphabet soup.
Right.
The second piece, and I want to give Sean Matlock, Shayla, and the team, they came and met and said, look, we are struggling when it comes to communication. We're used to, we know how to build buildings, but we also have to marry that with the community's input, engagement, and sometimes their disagreement with the decisions we make. So we are looking for a process in which we can actually get ongoing support for the CIP team explicitly just for them, because their topics are different than when Raven or John sends out a communication about any, you know, a Google alert about a new hire or something like that. They're talking about building a school in the back of a neighborhood where there's a 100-year floodplain.
Right.
How do we have that conversation so that we don't get down the road and have to make a decision because of input and engagement of the community?
Right. And I think it's important that the community is educated better on when it is. I mean, because we, for example, the auditorium at, and I never can pronounce that school, Floyd, I think it's great that he's coming out every week to talk to us and show that it is important to his school and him. It's important to us that these performing arts students have an auditorium to perform in. Today may not be as effective as in the spring when we're discussing it, when we, you know, when we're at the point of planning out our next set of goals. And it could be an opportunity that we're strategic in making it a part of our, you know, stage renovations or, you know, an a la carte service. We could do a little bit over time. I think you're right. It is very important that we engage our community in a way that they're like, oh, this is my time to get it on for next year's budget. Because what we're talking about today, we're not starting from scratch today. You all have already been investigating and budgeting and looking at facilities that need the District Heights facility that has the mold. I mean, Capitol Heights. One of those heights. Oh, okay. Yeah.
District
Heights. I want to make sure that I don't want to get it wrong either. So, but those things sort of, you know, impact sometimes the plan. So if we're talking about, we need to just educate our community on when it's most effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Page.
So this is a question and a comment. I'm very excited about item 5.4, a proclamation commemorating International Conflict Resolution Day, especially because we are moving towards a restorative justice system, hopefully, in the near future. So I'm very, very excited about that. So thank you about that proclamation. And I wanted to know, what will we be doing in our schools to support this proclamation?
So in the, Gwen, if you can answer it.
Well, we are very excited about the restorative justice and practices that we're about to implement in our schools, and we've identified the targeted schools that we're going to support to really encourage the utilization of those practices. We know that we do have some existing schools in our county, like at Oxon Hill Middle School, where restorative practices is implemented in a very excellent manner. So we want to replicate that, and we're grateful again that the board supported the position that is now in the Department of Student Services to help us to move that initiative forward. So in our proclamation, we certainly have given many ideas that schools can utilize to demonstrate how to resolve conflict among peers and so forth. And we hope that our schools will be able to utilize those suggestions to promote and the celebration of that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's vote on the budget, on the non-budget consent agenda. The non-budget consent agenda. The consent agenda that doesn't have budget implications. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Thank you. That passes. We'll now move on to the budget consent agenda. I'll yield the floor to Dr. Golson for an introduction of item 6.1 under the budget consent agenda.
Item 6.1 requires approval of the October 2018 expenditure requirements.
May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
May I have a second? Okay, Ms. Williams.
So welcome aboard. We're going to get to know each other very well. I've gotten over the fund balance issue. This expenditure report, I've been working with the previous CFO in trying to make it a little bit more easily readable for us. And one of the suggestions that I made was to have it look like our 17 or 32, whatever those line items that make up our budget. If we could look at what we get our expected expenditures for next month, and then we have our previous expenditures, actual expenditures for 2 months ago. If that actual expenditure could look like our budget line items, to say we are at 30% of line item 1, 50% of line item number 2, then we can sort of follow it a little bit better.
You're asking for it by category?
Yes, state category.
Okay, we'll make sure we get that to you.
Okay. Yeah, I was promised that it would happen this year, and then everybody left.
Well, we will make sure that you have a conversation with Mr. Herbisman so he can clearly understand, so we can make sure it's done this year.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no one else, I will put the vote before you to approve item 6.1 under the budget consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Thank you. That motion carries. Colleagues, we're on second readers, and I now yield the floor to Dr. Golson for an introduction to items 8.1 through 8.3 under second reader. And I'm going to yield the chair briefly to Ms. Boston.
Items 8.1 through 8.3 requires board approval of the 2019 Special Education Staffing Plan, the FY 2020 through 2025 Capital Improvement Plan, and the FY 2019 Comprehensive Maintenance Plan.
I was going to, I have a question. Madam Vice Chair, do you want to go item by item, or do you want to open up the floor? I was suggesting to break up all three, so we have three different discussion sessions. If folks have questions about special education, no point in using up all the time for all three. It's too late now. I buzzed in before.
Unless we make a substitute motion. Mr. Wallace, are you suggesting a substitute motion?
Yes.
I will second that substitute motion.
Motion to divide the question.
Move to divide the question.
Sorry, that would be a motion to divide the question.
Yes. Madam Vice Chair, I move to divide the question.
Second.
I think Ms. Emmons.
I have a motion.
Move approval.
Okay. So it's been properly moved and second, and we have questions for 8.1? So Lupe.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, so I'm not sure if I get through this first go around. I wanted to sort of discuss a little bit the relation of our suspension of African American students with disabilities. Our rate, it's pretty high, and I wanted to discuss what are we doing to sort of address this issue.
The disproportionality for special education students in Prince George's County has been one that has been cited since 2009. But during the 2017-18 school year, the Department of Special Education targeted 32 schools. We identified those 32 schools based upon the state's formula, which indicates that we must have a percentage rate that is below 2.0%. And what we did was we looked at those 32 schools, devised a plan in which last year, each and every month, we had a discipline committee that analyzed the data for each and every one of those schools. PPWs led that particular effort. We attended from central office staff. We hired crisis intervention resource teachers, psychologists who were not assigned to do tests but were assigned to explicitly provide mental health and social emotional support to targeted schools that had a higher rate among the 32. We also utilized social workers to help us toward this effort. By the end of the 17-18 school year, 14 out of 32 of those schools were no longer disproportionate. So we are moving in the right direction. We have the right plan in place, for our district. We're going to go back because the state requires consecutive years, so we have to not only address it for last year with our new plan, but we also have to continue that effort. We will focus again on those 32 schools. We will utilize the same monthly plan and framework. And I strongly believe that if we were successful in having a percentage rate of 2.0% for 14 out of 32 of those schools, we can replicate those efforts in all 32 of those schools. But I want to be very clear, that is only in 32 of our schools where we have a disproportionate suspension rate, and that's where we're placing our focus and emphasis. And we have the right plan in place now to do that.
Yeah, in the 32 schools, there's a subset of middle and high schools, correct?
Yes.
24 middle schools and 31 high schools. But out of those, the crisis intervention teachers are at 28 out of the 32 schools.
So out of the
32
schools, yes, because we decided to differentiate where we needed to place the crisis intervention resource teachers based upon the patterns of the degree of suspension. So some of the schools needed more direct support than others to meet the state target and ultimately the federal target.
So 4 out of the 32 schools have no support. But you're saying it's based on the fact that they've made the improvement.
They've made improvements, definitely so.
So the other question I had, and I think Ms. Boston had alluded to this, was what does it mean when we say qualified substitute when we're talking about special education? What are the qualifications that we're looking for or appropriate licensure?
So you're referring to substitute teachers?
Mm-hmm.
So as substitute teachers in Prince George's County have to meet the requirements that all substitute teachers have to meet. And they don't have to be certified, however, in special education. I know that Mr. Burnett can speak to that probably with greater, level of expertise. But our substitute teachers have to be supported by experts in special education from central office so that when they are providing services to students with disabilities, there's evidence that experts in special education are supporting those teachers, and that's why Ms. Bowman puts together a support plan for those schools where there are vacancies so that we can ensure that those teachers get support from us to understand how to meet the needs of our students.
I think an area where I've gotten feedback is around the notification when they are temporary or permanent vacancies. And what is usually our timeline associated with notifying parents?
So we are expected when there are substitute teachers in special education or speech services to notify our parents immediately. So I would need to find out more specifically what schools in particular you may have received that information so that I can try to support that effort.
And we actually only have 19 vacancies in the area of special education with more than 1,800 special educators who serve our students.
I also, and I know we talked a little bit when we met last time, the breakdown describing the number of staff positions who support students with special education, it is the breakdown of the teachers who support students with autism. The data is apparently very difficult because the students with autism are not only for autism. How do we allocate the proper resources for autism if that's the case? If they're embedded within other classrooms, or?
So to clarify, I know exactly what you're asking. So to support students with autism who require being in a specific location, a self-contained class, We provide staffing guidelines that include 1 special education teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. And typically, the number of students in that class can be arranged between 7 to 9 students. So that's the example for those particular students with autism who would need that service. However, we know that there are also students with autism who are included in general education classes, and so they can be among students who are grouped in co-taught classes with their other students, with other students who have disabilities. So there are 2 different types of staffing that we would look at. Certainly those who are included, but then I think more specifically in the staffing plan, you see references to how we would staff, for example, autism services when a student requires self-containment.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Mason, I wanted to thank you for all of the work that you've done with creating and putting up this report. I think it's great to have a plan and guidelines. I just want to be sure that it's followed. And I know in your report, you have on page 27, I think, 26, 27, you have listed out kind of the action steps to ensure accountability to this plan. I think what would be helpful is maybe for us to see a snapshot of compliance and that this is being followed. I don't know whether that's a report to one of the committees or just an FYI to the board and one of our weekly updates just to see where we stand in compliance with this staffing plan. I think that would be very helpful. Another thing is just maybe providing an update on some of the ways that you've ensured compliance over the course of the past year, because I know that you've done a lot to make sure that we are in compliance with state standards, and presenting that as, or incorporating that into the listening session that we plan to have on special education in the coming months. So that would just be my one request, that you incorporate the efforts that you have made regarding compliance for special educations and operations for special education in the listening session that we will have, or the board work session we will have. And then the second thing is ensuring that we kind of get a snapshot on how we stand when it comes to caseload compliance and staffing compliance in the spring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My comment is for a different agenda item, not for this one. I'm not for this agenda item.
Dr. Mason, how does this plan address students who are in alternative schools?
I know that one of the questions that has been asked of me of some of the alternative school administrators has been, how do we ensure we support the needs of special ed students when they are placed in alternative schools? And I know that we do provide, a special ed teacher to help to support those particular students. I think typically put like a 1.0 FTE in those particular sites to support those students.
And do you think that's sufficient? I mean,
well, we would have to really go back and drill down and look at the data again to make a determination whether or not that is sufficient or not. At this particular point, I don't have any data that would suggest the need for more, even though I do know that there are some questions about how can we really ensure that we're meeting their needs. So I'm hoping to engage in more discussions with the administrators in the alternative schools to talk about that in particular. They've reached out.
yeah, it would be very helpful. I sit on the expulsion committee with Ms. Boston and Ms. Grady, and I'm very concerned about our students who we send to the alternative schools that have IEPs, and that their IEPs are being followed and they're getting all the support that they need. So, I mean, I would be interested in following up around what we do there.
Okay, thank you.
It's round two. Before we get to round two, I'd like to follow what Mr. Burrows just said, and he's correct. When we sit on those expulsion committees, I think it was stated to us, and I don't know how true that is, that when a student is recommended to go to an alternative school, he does not or she does not get the IEP or the accommodations that they would have normally get at a regular school, and that is the issue. I believe that if you're going to have a student with an IEP and accommodations and they're in the school almost for a full year, that they're not, we're not being compliant with that, with their IEP plan. So that was just to follow up to let you know what we're hearing.
Thank you.
Okay. Round two, Ms. Grady.
Thank you. How many people are assigned to provide the related service of assistant technology evaluations and support?
How many people are
Assigned. Mhm.
assigned to provide?
The related to like assistant technology evaluation?
So we have a small central office team that's responsible for assisting us to provide the assistive technology assessments to our school system. That team might consist of approximately about 4 to 5 staff members at central office.
4 to 5. And I think I touched on this last time around when we were talking about training and how do you support the training. For the professional learning opportunities, how many teachers actually take advantage of those trainings?
I do have data that I can provide to you, and perhaps when we have our work session, I can drill down and provide you with background information on all the data that we've collected over the past year on our professional learning opportunities.
Great. And I had another question. How do you all address the situations when staffing ratios are higher than those that are recommended?
So we, on a monthly basis, take a look at our class sizes. We monitor our class sizes, and when there are requests that come in for additional support, particularly for additional adult support, maybe known as a dedicated aide, we analyze again the class size. We look at the entire building of all the services that are in that school. We look at the staffing that's been allocated, and then we make a determination if we need to add more staff to support the needs of the school. So we do have a process where we monitor class size, and when there are requests, we also expect our special education staff to go out to observe, to look at the environment, to make an assessment whether or not the request is warranted.
Okay. All right, that's good for me right now. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't see any more lights on. Oh, Ms. Page, your light is buzzing. Did you need to? Okay. Okay, so we're ready to vote on 8.1. All those in favor? Oppose? Okay, roll call. Okay. I didn't see any nays or hear any nays, so I'm good. 8.2. You have a motion? Any questions? I see Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace and then Ms. Williams, and then Ms. Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And I want to thank first the administration for the follow-up attachments and board docs from the last meeting. Thank you very much. My first question, of course, is going to be about Suitland High School. There's no surprise there. But I know they're talking with some folks offline at the last meeting, before this meeting, that the figures that are on board docs may not be the full picture of what's going on with Suitland. So if the administration could just kind of clarify some things for the community. I know it says it's zeroed out, but there might be money from last fiscal year that's still being used. Just clarify for the public, please.
Yeah. Suitland is currently in feasibility, which we expect to be completed by December. The current CIP budget, as you can imagine, only really drains what we're trying to request for the FY20 year. We will be using FY money allocated in the previous 2 years, which is roughly $15 million, to complete the design work for the new school. So once it's completed the feasibility, and then we start working with the design and getting planning approval and that sort of thing, that's what that money will be used for.
Is there a rough estimate on what, numerically, what that amount is for, I guess, last year and this year?
Well, the total amount of money that we received for the last 2 years was $15 million. So that's an extraordinary amount of money for planning, and we expect that should take us through feasibility and through planning.
Perfect. And correct me if I'm wrong, the planning is almost winding down, if not more than halfway done. Should be done by the end of spring?
Well, the feasibility study will be done by December, end of
better.
December, beginning of January. And then once we'll take that information and we'll use that to give to the architects to start drafting actual designs of the building. So that's it's a process that's been described before, and there will also be at that point a planning committee put together from the community that will also have input into how the structures will be put together based upon the recommendations in the feasibility study.
Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
We will be requesting construction funds in FY21.
In FY21?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think that's it for Suitland. My next question, I follow up Ms. Williams and Mr. Kravitz, leader at PTSA at Benjamin Falloy, just around excuse me, it's a PTO. Thank you, Ms. Boston. It's just as powerful. It's just as powerful. Asking about auditoriums for specialty schools, and administration can correct me if I'm wrong, but Benjamin Falloy it wasn't always a Center for Visual, Creative and Performing Arts, and that sometimes you put programs into buildings that are not really designed for those programs, and this, I guess, is the unfortunate circumstance because of those actions. And how do we, as a board, as administration, as a county, look at education specs for buildings after we place a very positive and successful program into a building?
So the information you just shared is accurate. Hindsight, what we should have done was made changes to a facility before moving a program in. But let's be clear, we've had Thomas Pullen students who've been in that facility for a very long time. And that facility also is a performing arts facility for our elementary to middle school students, and they too do not have an auditorium. So it doesn't mean that we can't have a program in a facility without having an auditorium. What we have to do is think of creative ways to make sure that those students can experience and do their performances in surrounding schools that have an auditorium, and make sure that they get first choice on those use of facilities so that they can do that. They unfortunately won't have the access to use a black box technically to practice each and every day, but we do try to make concessions so that they can still do what they need to do at their facility so that they can perform and do performances to show their expertise.
So a school like Benjamin Falloy or Thomas Pullen, they could go to their, I guess, the neighboring or the closest high school that has the type of facilities to accommodate for any
Definitely, and we strongly encourage it.
Okay. There wouldn't be any fee associated with the school, right?
No, because it's ours.
Just making sure. Just making sure. Okay. Thank you. That answers that. And then there was another comment in the public comment session. I forgot the woman's name, but she talked about the redrawing of district lines and boundaries and that kind of third rail topic that a lot of elected officials, not just here in this building, but even building just a couple of steps away, don't even want to talk about. And also the relocating of programs, and I've been an unfortunate victim of the closing of facilities 2 months after I just got here. Someone told me that we had to close 2 schools in my district. So what is the conversation around the CIP and make sure that we're having proper, effective communications to the communities and say, you know what, sometimes if you want a new school, this is what you're going to have to do. Similar to the conversation they had in Baltimore City. You want 30 new schools, you got to close 30 other ones to consolidate. Or if you want this great, beautiful facility, you might have to relocate a program that's been historic in that community and put it somewhere else so we don't have to close that school. Are there any forecasting of events that you think that this board should have with their community?
So one, it's always a process where we make sure that we communicate with our community and inform them of what the process is. In terms of what Ms. Williams mentioned before about CIP, it's on a different schedule than the schedule that we use for budgeting, and so it sometimes can be confusing. And to add to it, the change in boundary is also on a different schedule. What's important to note is that we did meet as cabinet today and review preliminary plans for boundary changes for next school year, and on this list are no school closures. But at the same time, we do our very best to make sure our community is informed to know that in order to get a new facility and for it to be funded by the state, they are going to look at the surrounding schools within a certain radius of that school to determine how many available seats are in each of those schools and how many, and what's the capacity of the building that we're asking to renovate. And if we're not willing to make those changes as a school system, then they're not willing to provide the funding to support that structural change.
And then that leaves us as the local jurisdiction to foot the bill. So if the community, and maybe, let me know if I'm wrong, but if the community doesn't want a relocation of a program or the changing of boundaries or closing of a neighboring school, then they have to buck up and say, I'm willing to have an increase in my revenues that I give to the county to pay for something that I want because I don't want someone else to suffer. Is that correct?
That is correct, or to continue to reside in that facility with no changes.
Exactly. Just making sure. And so that communication, I think board members should have with their communities, because I have it almost every town hall that I have, including one tonight probably. Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair. I yield back.
Okay, Mrs.
Hi. I just have a question about the staged renovations. Where would schools find their school listed for those staged renovations, or is it something that they need to request?
We have not yet listed the schools for stage renovations on our website yet, but we will be putting them up on the website once we've got confirmation of the plan. There are roughly 11 schools that we're looking at for stage renovations, and we will have that finalized list up.
Okay, thank you. And my other comment is always about the wonderful job that you all are doing with the public-private partnership. We released that RFP, and it's due in when? For the consultant to help develop that. When is it due in?
September 26th.
Okay, you guys are flying. I appreciate your work. Thank you.
Ms. Ahmed?
Hi, I wanted to thank the administration for the follow-up responses. My questions are going to be based on CIP, those follow-up responses for CIP. On one of the questions that was brought up by Board Member Murray was around High Point, and in the response here, it shows that the administration conducted a review of High Point High School on the CIP, and it's reflected in the slides, but I don't see those slides. So could someone just verbally express what that review was about?
Yes, I can. The slides were, we revised them to show the actual priority. Mm-hmm. The way we had originally done this was based upon a request for money from, as you see, in the original version of the presentation, we had split up state funding and county funding, okay? Mm-hmm. And so the High Point wasn't showing up there as a result of that. And so we revised it to show all the priorities of the modernizations that are currently being worked on. And it does show High Point as the 7th priority amongst the ones that we have in the modernization list.
Okay, and as of now, we only have how many modernizations do we have in the CIP currently?
The total number of modernizations is going to be somewhere around, I believe, 19 total. And there are, I believe, listed currently, we have...
Suitland.
Let me just go right to the list. Oh, just give me a moment.
Middle schools.
I believe... Oh, yes. So we have 10 that are currently listed as requesting some sort of funding or approval. Those would be William Wirt, the middle school, the new Glen Ridge Middle School, the new Adelphi Middle School, William Schmidt Recreational Outdoor Center, the Suitland High School Complex, the new International High School at Langley Park, High Point High School replacement, the new Northern Area High School, Cool Springs Judy Center modernization and addition, and Cherokee Lane Elementary School.
Okay, so High Point is 7th in priority, but it's not listed in the breakdown of state and county.
It wasn't originally listed there in the state, and so now we've created a new slide that shows the direct priorities. Just like the same thing happened to Suitland. It wasn't listed because we weren't requesting any funding for the year.
Okay. And then my other question, which you have very answered in a lot of detail, was around overcrowding. So thank you so much for giving the details. I just want to give an overview to colleagues that basically I asked about how the CIP would address overcrowding in the north, and the response from administration was that it would add 2,750 more middle school seats, 2,500 more high school seats, and just over 800 elementary school seats. My question to administration, my follow-up question is this going to be at pace with where we expect to be in 5 years and 10 years? Are these enough seats for the projected enrollment?
I can answer that quickly, no.
Okay.
It will not. So in our approved FY 2017 Educational Facilities Master Plan, we have in it 2 new middle schools for the northern area of the county, 1 new elementary school and 1 new high school. So if we were on pace with our recommendations in the FY 17 Education Facilities Master Plan, we would be able to. But because we are behind in terms of implementation of it, it still won't be enough seats. If we're able to catch up with adding those additional facilities, we will begin to close that gap.
Okay. I know there have been conversations, and this board has seen from this team the efforts put forth for public-private partnerships. I would just urge that when all this conversation is happening, we're really focusing on how do we address overcrowding that we know will occur, and are our priorities aligned with addressing what we know is going to be an impending, could be an impending issue if we don't address it immediately.
I agree. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do just want to add one piece. I appreciate Board Member Murray's advocacy on High Point High School. And as administration, we understand the importance of replacing that facility site. It is long overdue. But I just want to make sure that I make a note that our Education Facilities Master Plan, which was approved on June 7th, does have High Point being placed on the board docket for FY 2021. And because of the community and Murray's advocacy, we did move that up. So it was reflected in the June 7th Education Facilities Master Plan that was approved by the board. And as Mr. Matlock mentioned, it was not showing and reflected in the previous PowerPoint, but we wanted to make sure that it was shown here so that our community members would know that it does remain a priority for us, just like Suitland does.
Okay. And then one question relative to District 5. Ms. Chason alluded to it earlier, but Woodmere Elementary School is, just to clarify, is not on the CIP currently, correct?
Correct.
When would be the time for me to think about moving it to be, when would it be on the CIP?
We'll have to go back.
It's in cycle 2.
Yeah, I was
It's in
going to say,
cycle two.
we haven't completed cycle one. So I keep cycle one like a placemat in my notebook as a reminder, and it's not on cycle one.
Okay. So all of everything that's in the CIP currently is on the cycle one.
That is accurate.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
I have one question, and I'm not sure if if it should be in this 8.2, or should I save my question for 8.3, but I got a bunch of questions for that one as well. But I just want to know, where are we with updating our bus facilities, especially those garages where our employees are actually out there in bad weather. Bad weather is getting ready to come. I mean, it's getting ready to get winter time. And for the last 3 years, we've only renovated one of those garages, and they were supposed to have been, I think a couple of them supposed to have been renovated a year or so ago. I just don't want us to lose that. I know the last time we were told that because we had people that were out and they were short, that was the reason why we didn't do movement on that. But hopefully you're fully staffed now, I hope. And that is not a reason why we're not moving forward with those garages.
Currently, there are several of the projects that are now going to A&Es for design. So that's where they are at the moment. They're in design.
So when will we expect for them to come out of design? Because they've been in design now for a couple of years.
I don't have the actual information on that, but I can provide it for you later.
Well,
some of the A&Es were just recently, as you noted, there were some people out that were part of the review panel for the A&Es, and so as a result, those A&E solicitations didn't get completed. Once they were completed, now they are moving towards design.
Yeah, I would hope that you would keep the board abreast of that, because we took a tour on that about 2 or 3 years ago, and we were told one thing, and that hasn't happened. And we really want to see movement on that, and hopefully I'm speaking for the rest of the board, because I think it's the conditions that some of our employees are having to work. I think it's not only is it really bad conditions, but it's really unsafe. Because if you're talking about mechanics out there in the rain or whatever, trying to fix those buses to make it safe for our students, I think this should be a priority for us to make sure we get quick movement on this. Thank you.
We will.
Mr. Burrows.
My question, you mentioned that High Point was 7, and I just looked at several different lists, including the PowerPoints. I just don't see it reflected anywhere. Where were you reading from?
We revised the PowerPoint that was presented on the 6th, and it's a new PowerPoint.
On my time.
Ms.
Wilson, my time.
I'm sorry. So we revised the PowerPoint that was presented on the 6th. And so we updated one of the slides. That's the original slide, and the way it was originally done, we broke it out by states funding, and so there's a new list there that shows the priorities.
So, Mr. Burrows, Dr. Golson met with the staff last week, asked them to do a full review of the CIP list. She asked, well, she's here right next to me, but she asked kind of detailed questions related to High Point's placement in particular, along with Suitland High School, a couple other things that were reflected in the previous slide. CIP staff went back and revised, based off of that conversation, revised the slides and presented it to us yesterday. And we just didn't want to send last second a new PowerPoint presentation. That's why we verbally just shared with you. We can provide you the PowerPoint so you see where it is on the list so you clearly understand it, but that's what happened from a timeline perspective.
Okay, but we're voting on this.
So actually, what you're voting on is a continuation of the Education Facilities Master Plan, which does show High Point being one of the projects for this year. What we did was, in the previous presentation, the way that it was shown, we left it off, inadvertently left it off because we were showing it versus state versus local funding. So we made it so that it would be more self-explanatory and that you could see it on the slide.
Yeah, June 7th was the educational facilities master plan that you all voted on, approved, which included High Point. What she also stated was that it was scheduled for 2021, FY 2021, but from conversations, we recognize that if we push it to 2020. So we're recognizing clearly that High Point's an issue that we need to address. It just wasn't reflected in the PowerPoint, and we didn't want people to assume that the PowerPoint was the final list because it's actually what you already approved in June 7th.
Okay. Just if you can email that to me, I'd appreciate it. Also, can you help me understand the rationale of Camp Schmidt being here?
The rationale is condition of the location required it to be modernized, and so it needed updating for lots of different reasons based on that.
What are the lots of different reasons?
Well, my understanding is that the actual facility itself needs updating from just facility standpoint. Trails need to be improved. There's just a lot of groundwork that needs to be done at that facility.
And of course, every fifth grader in PGCPS attends it and remembers it fondly. So it does affect the whole student body as a whole.
Yeah, I get that. I guess where I'm struggling is that we have students sitting in class without heating and air issues. And so if we're going to spend $31 million, is that, make sure I have my number correct? Yeah, $31 million. I would rather fix all the heating and cooling issues before upgrading Camp Schmidt.
And Camp Schmidt also has cooling and heating issues, and the students have to sleep there over the night.
Yeah, I get that, but we also have students literally in rooms of 100 degrees, 80 degrees, 90 degrees, and they're unable to learn. They're there every single day. We have teachers who are reportedly getting sick because of the issues in their building. And so I agree. I think our priority should be fixing places where there's health and safety issues. Now, if there are health and safety issues at Camp Schmidt, I do think we should fix those. Obviously, if they have heating issues, we should fix it. But literally, I get, the thermometers from teachers taking pictures of their classrooms when it's too hot, saying, that this is just really unacceptable. And so I think it's a better use of funding or priority, rather, is the HVAC systems.
So as we've talked about, the EFMP sets the vision, and that's what the board approves in the spring, and the order had William Schmidt in there and has had it in there since 2017. And so we've been doing work on it, planning work, and now design work, hiring an architect.
In addition, Mr. Burrows, we're in from 2020, FY20 to FY 2023, we've got roughly about 100 between the various projects that we have going or plan to do that over that period of time, about $165 million in HVAC improvements. And one of the things is we're trying to get to as much of it as we can get to it. But even with even if we had all the money in the world, you couldn't fix them all at the same time because of swinging issues and staging issues. We're trying to get to as many of them as we can.
I just don't understand why it's not a major priority on this list, and you have something, the outdoor, educational camp is.
Well, the systemics are ongoing. They're throughout the whole CIP. So we have systemics that we're paying for that are not listed as specific school, broken out by specific school, but we have systemics going throughout the entire district, work that we're doing for HVAC improvement. And so there are a ton of projects that we're doing. And as I said, it is a priority. We're spending $165 million over the next 3 years on those types of projects.
Dr. Watts, how much would it cost to fix? I think you gave that number a little while ago to fix all the AC units. I know we're requesting almost 16.5 from the county million for HVACs, but in order to fix this systemically, how much would it cost?
We gave a rough estimate of the CIP. It was a little over $200 million that was in the CIP. That included all the systemics, all the modernizations, and some of the work that our maintenance department does.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like with the dire situation that we're in, with the winter that we know that we're going to have, and the summers that we expect to get warmer and warmer, I don't see Camp Schmidt, that $31 million I would prefer to go to a place where students are and teachers are every single day. And I know people who have gotten sick because of the conditions that they're currently in. And so I'm very concerned about that.
I would point out one thing. It's not a zero-sum game necessarily. I mean, what we have for William Schmidt is planning approval from the state, so they've already agreed to provide funding for that project. In order to get the project to that point where you're going to get state funding, takes quite a bit of effort and a lot of different steps. So when you get a project to that point, if you pull it back or you don't do the project, then you're not actually being able to then shift state money to another project. You'll just lose it for that particular segment. So I appreciate what you're saying. I do, as far as priority is concerned. But we also have to. It's something that's been going on. The plan for this is again within the EFMP. It was in the previous EFMP and the CIP. We've gotten these approvals, and I do realize we have some critical issues that we need to address in HVAC, which we are attempting to do through our budget and our CIP this year and next year. I think this past summer we did 20 HVAC projects, roughly. So, I mean, it's something that we're doing on an ongoing basis, and it is definitely a priority with us. It's just not necessarily broken out by school in the CIP. It's part of the overall systemic payments system that we used and our other projects.
What role does the, I know the Board of Public Works, you know, some legislation passed and changed its functioning. Can someone explain to me what the new process is? Because I know the governor, the comptroller, several folks are very concerned, you know, delegation, the whole county is really concerned about this HVAC issue. So I'm not sure who to, I mean.
Well, it's now a commission instead of it used to be the interagency committee on school construction, public school construction. It's now the interagency commission. They are in the process of rule writing right now. We did meet with them recently here, at least the representatives of their staff, and toured William Wirt and some of the other schools that we have and discussed our plan for our CIP. The process is changing. It has not been formulated, though we no longer go before the Board of Public Works as we would have normally done in August to present our proposed CIP. It's now going to go directly to the interagency commission after we get approval by the county.
And who regulates that commission? Or like, what is the process? I mean, the Board of Public Works allow citizens, elected officials to go, school districts to go and sort of make a case for priorities that matter. I mean, what is that current vehicle now?
They're currently writing their rules and regulations. It's a very new thing. They just had their very first meeting in August. So it's I think it's a 9-member commission made up of people, both former politicians, people from the community, and staffers there. But their rules have not been formally completed as of this point.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Valentine?
Quick question around crowded classrooms in the north to my colleague, Ms. Ahmed. When do we redraw those lines for in schools? I'm just trying to how often do we do that?
For boundaries?
Yeah.
We review it annually. Some years we don't have any recommendations to make. So
Okay.
for example, last year we did not make any recommendations.
So for like overcrowded schools with like the number of temporaries, you just assume that based on proximity and open seats, whether you'll make any changes?
So temporaries, we do a different process. Once we get projected enrollment, which is typically February of every school year, that information is then shared with the Associate Superintendent for Building Services. And he then looks at increased enrollment, compares what their state rated capacity is for the building, determines how many temps they currently have, determines if they need additional temps or if they need temps taken away. Look at that from a whole district perspective, then reaches out to the area office to get their input. on recommended changes. Sometimes it's to remove temporaries from a school site, provides them the opportunity to refute the claim of removing. Sometimes physically goes out to the school site to say, no, you really do need to have that tent removed. And then we then place those tents at the new location. That process typically takes place from February until the end of May.
Okay, it's every year. Second question is, with regard to the CIP, I think we're going about this with certain assumptions about how much money we will get from the state. And so my question is about legislative strategy and the role the school board can play. The example of Baltimore City, which is about 5 years old now, continues to be brought up. Some people say it's probably outdated. Maybe it's not unlikely. That year was unusual because there was other legislation that came about that allowed members of the Baltimore delegation to pretty much trade some of their votes in order to get support from folks outside of the city. But I know a couple years ago, there was a 3-district group that came together, petitioned the governor. Elections coming up pretty soon. Depending on the outcome, we may have a governor more supportive than others, who knows? But the question is, in lieu of that, what can we do as a system to increase the likelihood that we, not just get what we think we're going to get, but exceed, because that can answer a lot of the questions around the list and who's where on the list and how much money we get, and parents coming saying, how do we move my child's school up in the list? That list is a function of how much we get, and then, so how can we as a system support you all, whether it be taking buses of parents to Annapolis, writing letters to the governor. These are things that we can do, but since I've been on the board, I have not felt like I've been asked in any way to bring forth any effort in Annapolis around particularly this issue as a delegation, as a school board, as a council, as a Maryland, as a Prince George's County delegation, how we're working with other delegations, because we're going to be back here every year trying to ask for money from us, either a stagnant or shrinking pot of money.
So first, I think it's important for us to realize that the funds that the state receives is for not just for PGCPS, but they have to support the other local education agencies. What we do have is trend data to show on average approximately how much we get from the state each year over the past 5 years, regardless of how much we ask for. They typically give us the same amount each year. The closest that we can come to doing something different would really be the public-private partnership piece. And it is in its infancy stages where we do have some of our staff members and some elected officials on the county government side who really are kind of delving in on what that would look like and potentially could be advantageous for the district to move forward. But like I said, it's very much still in the infancy stages. And so I'm not sure that we'll know the fruits of the labor that committee is doing until probably the end of this school year. So in the meantime, we still have to continue to inform our community, our elected officials, about our aging infrastructure, about the fact that we actually do have an education facilities master plan, which has been informed by our master plan support project. We have an order of which we must do it. We have to continue to make sure our community understands we're behind the 8 ball in terms of making those changes, and we're going to continue to have infrastructure issues unless we can get the funding to do that, whether it's through local funding or through state. We're more likely to get local funding because I have to be honest, there are elected officials locally have been able to provide it from the county government more than we have received from the state. And so we just have to be diligent about making sure our community understands we're going to remain focused. We're going to continue to fight and argue about what we need to make sure that Prince George's County Public Schools has what it needs. And I feel hopeful after having met with the delegation last week and them wanting to say we all speak on one voice. And we will have an opportunity to meet again. This past meeting was just a meet and greet and for me to share the focus for the year. But they have already extended an opportunity for us to come back to have a conversation so that when session starts, we're speaking from the same page. So we even had the opportunity to talk about universal pre-K or full day pre-K for our students and how they can assist in that aging infrastructure. So I think we'll be able to begin that conversation. It won't happen overnight. The money won't fall out the sky, and we have to prioritize. But I do believe that there's hope on the horizon.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you and attending future meetings. I mean, we do have members of our delegation who are in leadership positions. At least they were last session. I believe some may end up moving up. And it's important that we just leverage those from our district who are in leadership positions and can hopefully ensure that we get more money than we expect. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick questions. One that I talked to folks out about following. We had the CIP hearing this week, and we had a number of citizens and parents inquiring about Hyattsville Elementary and Hyattsville Middle School. I want us to be able to give them some clarification and the board. And the question was first about kind of, it seems that Hyattsville's middle and elementary first was a little higher on the priority list and it's gone down. I know those things happen, but, you know, a good summary of why that's happened. The second part of the question that they asked was that I know now the Hyattsville Middle is being discussed as a possibility for one of the P3 partnership type of innovative funding, and they were excited about that, but there was a question. We've had a lot of talk of, is Hyattsville Elementary and Middle School going to be a single project that has been talked about? Are they separate projects, and where are they each? Is that enough questions? Everything you can tell me about Hyattsville.
I'm going to allow, I'd like to have Elizabeth Chason speak to that.
Thank you.
So Hyattsville Elementary and Middle School are now on page 18, slide 18, and they are slated for modernization replacement. And again, we went back and tried to honor the priority order that was in the EFMP. It does show a small county request in there.
So they're on a new slide 18?
Yes.
And
yes.
Is that the one we don't have? Okay.
I do apologize.
Oh,
so we will provide that PowerPoint so you can see it. Just so you know, Hyattsville Elementary and Hyattsville Middle are part of Cycle 1 and have been.
Right.
So in the future, we'll make sure that the information that's presented to the board is such a way that we won't have to make revisions in between board meetings, and that is reflective of the true actions of our staff.
Yeah.
So it's in Cycle 1. So tell the folks, because they're watching, if they said that what they're doing, they're watching on TV right now. What does that mean? What's the future? Where is it headed? What might they be able to expect in the Hyattsville community?
So what I did explain to a few of them after the meeting is that we used to be in a linear process with the EFMP, right? Everybody was in a row. But now with the idea of a P3 and the stage renovations, alternative financing, we're looking at spreading people across in about 3 buckets, if you will. And we're not sure which bucket you're in quite, right? So we made staff educated guesses based on our knowledge of whether you're a modernization, a stage renovation, or a limited renovation. And we put them all in a row, and so we're looking at Hyattsville as still being a modernization replacement, but until we do further studies and get further along, we won't know whether it could be a modernization or a stage replacement.
And best guess about when, so have we done the feasibility study? We haven't gotten that far yet?
No, that's what
Okay.
they would like us to do, and so
Right.
now there is money in here to do something like that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm all set. Mr. Wallace.
I've been trying to find that document, so now I know I'm not going crazy. So it's not up. Still may be going crazy, though.
We just sent it. And
Perfect.
We send it to Ms. Berry.
Okay. While that's being uploaded, and I can just go ahead and answer my own question when it is, what was the adjustment to the other schools that were shown in the previous document now that High Point is reflected? with any other changes, or are they just falling into place under those?
They're just falling into place. The only change you'll see is that you'll see the money that's being requested for High Point and I believe one other school. I think the new high school for planning dollars. It's like about $1 million each for planning for those schools, I believe. But that's the only. It just shows what we were going to request anyway. Instead of it being broken out, it was in planning. So we've now broken it out and shown it where that money's going.
Okay. And I'll also wait for the document uploaded. I also want to echo the sentiments of Board Member Burrows in regards to William Schmidt Outdoor Educational Facility. I finally remember my times there as a 5th grader. But I do understand the necessity of making sure that our facilities that students go to the other 100 and some odd days, other than the 2, are well maintained. I think we'll have that conversation in the next discussion item, agenda item. And I think our money should be best spent in the best places possible to get the best bang for our buck. Looking at the list, however, I don't see many schools that have a county-wide impact other than William Schmidt and maybe, dare I say, Suitland High School, where I think students come from every school board district. So it's a little selfish on my end to advocate for Suitland High School, but I think it's incumbent upon everybody on this board that may have parents, families, and students that come from every corner of this county go to Suitland High School. And I don't think you can say the same about some of these schools that are not even built yet, just proposed, or even some of these other schools that may just be neighborhood schools. Do they need to be rebuilt? Absolutely. But I don't think that we should forget that we do have some regional schools, we have some county-wide schools that every district is impacted. I yield back.
Ms. Grady.
I am good. My question was already answered. Thank you.
All right, sorry. All right, so seeing no other buzzes in, then I will put, we're just on 8.2, correct? Correct. I will put has it been moved and seconded? Okay, thank you. Sorry for my brief absence. All those in favor of approving 8.2, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. One no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that motion carries with 8 yeses and 1 no. And now we're at 8.3, I take it. I will entertain a motion to approve item 8.3 under second reader. It's been moved. May I have a second?
Second.
Discussion. Ms. Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Eubanks. I just wanted to follow up again on the follow-up notes regarding maintenance. My big concern here is it appears that we don't have hard numbers on the professional development opportunities for our maintenance staff. The reason that I see here that there are mentoring opportunities and orientations to new equipment and new technology, but I just want to ensure that all of our staff are receiving adequate professional development opportunities and that we're tracking that so that we can ensure compliance and ensure that those opportunities are being availed.
Yes. We actually, within the professional performance system, we are now tracking that information. This year, we have about 4,000 hours of training for the building services staff. The maintenance staff itself are licensed journeymen for the most part, and so the training that you're going to give to a licensed journeyman would be on new technology or new equipment. So we, in all of our contracts with our vendors and with our capital programs installs new schools, we require the vendors to provide that training, and sometimes that training is at the site, and sometimes that is at in a seminar type setting. However, we haven't tracked it in the past. We are going to begin to track that because you're correct. it gives us the ability to understand what employees have what hands-on training for what technologies.
Yes, and I would just suggest that as that's being tracked for next year, that information is included in this plan. That would be, I think, a good addition.
Yes.
The other thing is just something interesting that I saw here was that we're leasing 2 transportation lots, and I was just curious as to how are we using the Beltsville lot that we're leasing?
We're currently leasing Fairmont Heights bus lot, which was the lease that was entered in about 10 years ago. We recently leased because of the issue with our facilities for mechanics, we leased Beltsville bus lot, and we're in the process of getting it operational, getting a use and occupancy permit so we can begin operations there.
So we have the Beltsville garage, but we aren't fully using it. Are we using it at all?
Ms. Ahmed, I can speak to that.
Sure.
Okay, so we saw the need in the north, as you know, for garage. So there was an opportunity for us to lease a garage which was privately owned. So we're in the process of actually retrofitting that to make it usable for us as a garage in the north. The only other working garage we had in the north was Greenbelt, and that is in such a state where we felt a need to put one in the north. So we're in the process. We actually just applied for the final UNO, so hopefully we'll have that soon, and we'll be moving into the Beltsville garage very soon.
How long have we had that lot for?
I'm not exactly sure. I can check. You mean exactly when we signed the lease?
Has it been a couple of years?
No, it hasn't been a couple of years, but it has been longer than we anticipated. When we moved in, when we signed the lease, there were some things that we needed to do inside of the garage, along with the landlord, that we required them to do. So we're in the process of doing that. We're finishing that right now.
Okay, my concern is just leasing out a lot, a garage that we're not using, or we may not be using to our full capacity. The expense that might cause, that's just another concern. And so I just urge that as we move forward, that we're mindful of being able to use all of our properties and lands as much as we can, as quickly as we can. And if there's anything that we can do to help and assist you in that process, please let us know.
Absolutely, and we agree, and that's why we're trying to make sure we expedite it. Because as Ms. Boston alluded to earlier, we know that our garage is in such state, and we can't build them fast enough, but we want to make sure our employees are in the optimal place to work. One thing I do want to make point of too, also, Ms. Boston, is we did recently open the Crossland garage. The 4 other garages that are coming on point are in design. They are a little bit behind in terms of planning, but we hope to start construction, if not this summer, early next fall, on the 4 garages we have in plan for our transportation.
And just one follow-up request. When that lot is good and ready to go, could you let us know so that we can join your employees on their first day of work there?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Speaking of Ms. Boston, you're up.
Very quick. Mr. Stefanelli, where are we on the apprenticeship program, the one that we presented at the end of last school year? We talked about bringing our students, some of our students that, 11th or 12th graders, into our maintenance fund. Where are we on that process getting started?
The process for our department won't start until next September. The academic side has started their process. We're working on our side. We have 2 programs simultaneously. We want to start a program to train our employees inside, the employees that currently work for us, as well as the students at Crossland High School.
So you've identified people that will be working with those students, and also I think, we haven't been part of our meeting, but I think Dr. Watts has, when we are talking to the, the Maryland's apprenticeship, National Apprenticeship, State Apprenticeship Program, and I know they said that we haven't started that process, so are we looking at doing that sometime soon, so
Yes,
we can get ready for
believe,
that for next September?
Yeah, we've begun to start that process, so we will be ready next September. before next September to be an apprenticeship program. Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace.
Thank you. Wasn't prepared. A quick question as well. I know folks got to go. After our meeting last time, I looked a little bit more into the maintenance plan, and I thank you for the administration proposing it. Looks well on my end. And then I went out to the community for a community engagement meeting, and I brought up what's going to be on our docket at this meeting. And someone brought up a very key point that I forgot, being a former Annapolis staffer. We have the pleasure of having the oldest operating state capitol building in the United States. And so we talk about the aging infrastructure of our school system in terms of the school building ages. But if they were maintained well and beautified, sometimes that can increase the school pride in the facility, and folks wouldn't be such strong advocates for a new facility. And so my question to the administration, is there anything that the board can do even more on the maintenance side to reduce the concerns of the community on always advocating, I need a new school, instead of saying, if my school's just beautified and well-maintained, I wouldn't have to be such a fierce advocate to the board on the other side.
Well, from a maintenance standpoint, the reality when we do the feasibility study to replace buildings is the buildings may be beautiful. We do have buildings. Fort Washington Forest is a beautiful facility, but it's not educational. Adequacy does not meet our standards for today. So those decisions have to be made around ADA compliance, around adequacy, and quite frankly, the governor, if I had the workforce the governor had for the last 30 years, our buildings would all look like the state capitol, because he's able to renovate his building every 5 years. He's able to get the capital improvements that we don't see, that make that building, even though the shell of it looks like it did when it was first built, the whole interior has been, I'm sure, has been completely overdone time and time again. And that's part of the capital program that we need.
Yes, and I brought that up to the person that stopped me at the grocery store after the community event. If we had the workforce that, redid basically a museum that's in the state capitol, we would have beautiful facilities. I thank you very much for your work and for your team's work. I yield back.
Thank you. Seeing no one else to speak, I will put this vote before you to approve item 8.3 under the second reader. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Thank you. That motion carries. Colleagues, follow-up items for the August 23rd, 2018 and September 6th, 2018 board meetings are posted in board docs. Colleagues, may I please have a motion to approve actions taken in executive session on Tuesday, September 18th, 2018? It's been probably moved and seconded that the Board of Education hereby approve actions taken in executive session on September 18, 2018, and are as follows: labor negotiations, personnel, and personnel appointments. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Thank you. That motion carries. Colleagues, may I entertain a motion to adjourn? It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please leave. Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Have a great evening.